Thank you. We met in closed session regarding 3 items. I'll ask Assistant City Attorney if there are any reportable action.
No, Mr. Mayor, there's no reportable action.
Thank you so much. I want to read a statement for everyone's benefit, and it is, tonight's City Council will include Spanish language translation provided by a certified translator, Vivian Renale. Translator will be provided simultaneous translation from English to Spanish beginning at the start of the City Council meeting and ending at the completion of Agenda Item 7A relating to renters protection. 2 changes. We don't have enough translation equipment, so we will have a translator that will we got to get in sync here. I'm sorry if it's not coming across great. In any case, a translator to augment those that have translation headsets. Secondarily, since we have a pretty large agenda leading up to item 7A, which most of you here are for, we will not have that service for the items leading up to 7A, which is the renters issue, but rather spend the time devoted to that particular issue so as to keep the time within a reasonable length this evening. And so with that, we will turn to the open time for public expression. Anyone wish to address us on items that are not on this evening's agenda? We will not be able to take action, but certainly interested in your comments or input. Now would be the time to do so. Anyone? Seeing none, I'll close the public and turn to the city manager's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a few brief updates for you tonight regarding a few projects. The first one is that at our last city council meeting, we spent a significant amount of time on a very urgent item in our community, which is the wildfire prevention action plan. And the council gave us a number of questions to follow up on, which we're doing right now. And we're also putting cost estimates along all of the 37 objectives that are in that plan. And we're identifying ways to alternatives to fund those options. So meanwhile, the draft plan is at the cityofsanrafael.org website, which is our main website, www.cityofsanrafael.org. And right on that homepage, it's very easy to find. It's listed as a key initiative as the Wildfire Prevention Action Plan. So if anyone wants to see it, it's right there. And the fire department's been doing a number of community meetings. The next one is a week from today, next Monday night, right here in this room, right at 7 o'clock. And that's Monday, February 11th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers, just to have another opportunity to hear more about the plan and weigh in on it. Another issue that I haven't given an update on in a little while is the Permanent Transit Center. And I just wanted to say really briefly on that one that the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District is the lead on the environmental process. And they received over 200 comments on their notice of preparation. So they are busy looking at those and developing a scoping report which will summarize those comments and their responses to those comments. And they're also starting what they're calling a screening process that they do before the draft environmental impact report begins to see if they would recommend screening out any of the alternatives that are currently on the table before they go through the long, exhaustive year process evaluating a smaller number of alternatives. So there will be an opportunity for more public input before that happens. So there's not going to be a decision made and then released. But Golden Gate is planning additional public outreach late spring of this year or early summer before they start that next draft environmental impact report portion of the process. And then lastly, the City of San Rafael does a resident satisfaction survey once every 2 years. And we're just about to start our next one here in the next week or so. So I wanted to let the community know that if you get a phone call, email, or text from city.manager at City of San Rafael, it's real, it's not spam, and that we are hoping that people will take advantage and take our every 2-year survey, because it's something that I know the City Council takes very seriously, and we set up different programs, and we set up budget prioritization, and there's many things that we do through receiving the results of this survey. So just to let the community know that we will be out surveying over the next couple weeks, and that will be by phone, which is the way it's always been done in the past, but also over email, online, text messages, and all of those as well. So thank you.
Good, thanks. Excellent report on issues that are certainly on the community's mind, so thanks for bringing that to us once again. We'll now turn to the consent items, which are items 4A through 4C. Any comments by council members? Any items withheld? Anyone from the public wish to address us on any of these three? Seeing no one, we'll close and come back with regard to one motion regarding 4A through C.
I'll move the consent agenda.
And
second.
thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0, and we now have a special presentation, so if you'll join me at the podium. And I'll ask Tim Gilbert to join us. Tim, good evening. Got a few things to say about Tim. I want to first resolution of appreciation, and I'll read it so I don't miss anything because you deserve each and every word. For those of you who don't know, and those of you do, Tim Gilbert served on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee of the City of San Rafael for 15 years, from 2003 to 2018, and served the chair many years in this involvement. He's been involved with our Bike Ped committee for sure. Tim Gilbert always brings a unique perspective to discussions, especially regarding ADA considerations, and Tim Gilbert is a natural leader. There you go. Evidenced by the ability to be considerate and attentive to fostering collaborative feedback from other members and the public during his time as chair. He conducted meetings with a positive tone and welcomed everyone's ideas, and that's wonderful. Tim Gilbert volunteers his time besides Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee meetings to help further the committee's needs from serving as a ad hoc committee, speaking on behalf of the committee at city council meetings, and preparing letters of support for grant applications. And Tim is a champion for all forms of car-free travel, but he speaks up for our most valuable road users, including those with mobile impairments and disabilities, and resolved that we've acknowledged all this accomplishment, and thank you so much, Tim. You're a great guy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this honor. I served the people of San Rafael and the council members with pleasure, and I have to say this current council and the public works staff is exemplary in promoting non-motorized transportation. We all want a walkable city, and all the benefits that accrues to every single one of us. And I think this council is your best friend in that regard, so, and staff, so thank you all so very much.
Thank you very much. Do you want to shake your hand? Tim, two things. Yes, sir. Certificate.
Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Oh, we do?
We got about 6 more, so we're good.
Is that enough?
Should be.
Apparently, our city clerk has scrambled and made available more headsets. And can we make sure that everyone has them? Is there anyone that doesn't have a translation headset? And if we do have them for everyone, then we will not interrupt with the translation. So let's see. Are there, what, 3? Did I count 3? I just want to make sure everybody has. 1, 2, 3, 4. 5, 6, 7. Lindsay, do we have enough for everyone?
About 8.
We don't want your presentation interrupted, so let's take care of this first. Could you raise your hands again? I just want, if we don't have enough for everybody, we'll translate, because I don't want to overlook anybody. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 6. No, I've got, I think they're about 6. Okay, raise your hand once again, please. I'm sorry. Is there anyone that, there's several that don't. English to Spanish.
Right, but how do the English speakers understand what the Spanish speakers are saying?
We'll probably have to have the translator provide that service. Yes. So, are we going to be able to do this or not? Do we have enough or not? Okay, that's fine, that's fine. We don't, apparently we don't have quite enough. We want to make sure that everybody's included. So therefore, we will use the services of the translator, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. We'll go on to, excuse me, the public hearing with regard to the Southern Heights Bridge replacement project. And gentlemen, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. I'm Kevin McGowan with the Department of Public Works. And next to me is Hunter Young. He's our senior civil engineer. Hunter's going to be leading us through a presentation about Southern Heights Bridge. In the audience, we also have Julie, now I'm always going to mess up on her name, but Pasalacqua, I think that's correct. She's our design engineer on this project. And we have another team member for our environmental consultant here as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Hunter and I'll run the slideshow.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. This particular presentation deals predominantly with the Southern Heights Bridge, which is a bridge up in the hills above downtown San Rafael. It's located near D Street and Wolf Grade up at the top, just to give you a perspective of where we're talking about. This project has a bit of history. As you can see, what we have is, it goes back a few years. In June of 2016, the city retained a consultant who was hired and to review conceptual design, to give us an idea of what alternatives for bridge design we might want to consider. Then in February of 17, go back. After a number of public outreach meetings and presentations here before the council, there was the community had made their opinion or voiced their concerns about the type of bridge and the width of that bridge. And so council made a decision that we would install a 12-foot wide travel lane without or with no dedicated pedestrian path next door. So the existing conditions of the bridge as they are today, this is a recent photo. The bridge is closed to both pedestrian and public travel of all types. The last renovation of the bridge occurred in 1981. And since that time, the city has done a little bit of work in terms of just minor upkeep, but it was subject to immediate closure in December of 2017. Caltrans inspectors routinely inspect the bridge every few years, and when they went across it in December of 17, they identified a number of structural timber beams that needed replacement or were broken, and so we closed the bridge at that time. Since the December closure, Public Works staff have been working very diligently on this particular project in consultation with our design team. The major milestones that we've accomplished over the past year are actually quite significant. The first one is environmental clearance. We are required to get environmental clearance at both the state and federal level because there is federal money involved with this project. In February of 2018, we worked with Caltrans and we did get the environmental clearance process expedited because of the nature of the closed bridge. So that was a major milestone. And we are here tonight then to discuss in just a moment the state aspect of that environmental clearance. The next major milestone that we've been working on over the last year deals with utility coordination. The existing bridge has a water line that's mounted to the side of the bridge. Now, it has been deactivated by the water district, and the water district did install a new pipeline out in the street, so the residents are getting their clean water. The existing bridge does have a gas line attached to it, and that gas line is still active. We are working with PG&E to have it deactivated prior to commencing bridge construction. What this means is that PG&E will need to come in, we're hoping sometime this spring or early summer, and install a new gas line on both approaches on Southern Heights Boulevard. That way we can remove the old abandoned gas line. One item, go back to that one. This particular photo shows a standard wood utility pole. It does have PG&E high voltage lines on top. It has communication lines owned by AT&T and Comcast. And we need to relocate that particular pole. It'll be in the way of construction. In fact, if we don't move it, the new bridge deck will be right into it. So we will temporarily relocate the pole out of the way for constructability of the new bridge, and then it will need to be replaced in a similar location. Now, that may sound like an easy feat, but each of these utilities does require months and months of back and forth coordination, making sure they understand the impacts of construction so that their lines are not damaged during construction, and yet they can still provide their end users with the needs that they have. Next, we have an environmental summary, and I'm going to go ahead and ask our consultant here. This is Edward from LSA Associates. He has produced the environmental document that is part of our report tonight, and he has a couple of slides to review with you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. LSA prepared the initial study and mitigated negative declaration as required under the California Environmental Quality Act, as Hunter mentioned. Preparation involved a determination of the appropriate study area based on the project's environmental impacts. We evaluated 19 environmental thresholds per the CEQA guidelines. Key environmental concerns for the project included aesthetic and biological impacts of tree removal for the bridge replacement. Public review and circulation for the initial study mitigated negative declaration was between June 15th and July 16th of 2018. During that time, no comments were received from the public. However, subsequent to that, city staff did receive comments on August 13th via email, which the city responded to. These comments concerned the specific nature of utility pole locations, landslide risk and erosion control, traffic, and fencing. None of these comments warranted changes to the initial study mitigated negative declaration, and a response letter was generated. Mitigation measures were required to reduce impacts to aesthetics, air quality, biology, cultural resources, hazardous materials, and noise. After mitigation, all impacts were mitigated to below a level of significance. Tonight, we are asking City Council to approve and adopt the mitigated negative declaration so that a notice of determination may be filed with the county clerk, finalizing the CEQA process. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And this is a little bit more of what he mentioned here. So the notice of intent, and then completing this process is the notice of determination. Here we have a picture. It's a little difficult to see. The circles with the large X's identify the number of trees that we plan to remove as part of this project. We're anticipating upwards of about 15 trees, including some which are located at the intersection of Meyer Road and Southern Heights. These are 4 large eucalyptus trees. They're very old. They're mostly located in the public right-of-way. And in fact, one of them fell just last month in one of the storms. And what that did was it landed and damaged some of the high voltage lines. It did spark a grass fire in the area. We've had concerns, the residents have had their own concerns, and so we feel that it's appropriate, listening to the community, to go ahead and remove those trees those large eucalyptus trees in conjunction with this project. The other trees that are down near the bridge will also be removed. They will be replaced on a one-to-one basis. We're proposing coastal live oak based on feedback from our consulting team, and we think that is a good fit for the area. It's an approved tree for the fire department, and we will be irrigating and monitoring tree growth following construction. In terms of a construction schedule, this project may feel in some ways that it's taking quite a while, and listening to our consulting team who does this for a living as far as working on bridges, this is kind of a lightning fast bridge project. I hate to say lightning fast in terms of this context. It's just part of the way the federal government works when we're working with them in federal funding. Right now, we're currently working with property owners. The city, I'll talk to that in a moment, but we are going to have a need to rent a little bit of private property. We're currently working with the utility companies, as I noticed before. So we anticipate moving forward that in April, we can work with Caltrans. We need to get their approval before we are able to solicit and advertise the project for construction. We're anticipating that sometime this spring. We hope that come July, we can actually have that permission and advertise our project. Subsequent to that, we will come back before council to award the construction contract and then break ground what could be a month or two later. It depends on the timeline of the contractor and getting materials ready to go. What this does is put us at the earliest is anticipating a bridge opening at the end of 2020. We're anticipating somewhere in the order of magnitude of 12 to 15 months of construction. We hope it's less, but we also need to take into account that this is a very tight working condition area. There's very limited access. We anticipate the contractor needing to approach the bridge project mostly from the south side, which would be from Meyer Road and D Street. It will be very difficult and challenging to bring and stage materials on the north side of the bridge because of the switchbacks in the roadway to get up to the job site. So because of that and the utility complications, we do anticipate a significant construction window that would span at least one, if not more, rainy seasons, which could also bring its own level of delay into the project.
I'll just add that Hunter kind of covered this as well, that we are kind of subject to the state of California and their approval process through certain steps here in order to achieve the right allocation for construction. So there is a time lag in there. Normally, we would be able to bid something, open bids, and go to construction fairly quickly. But in this case, with federal funding, it may take a little bit longer depending upon the approval process we need from Caltrans.
In terms of funding, the vast majority of the funding for this project is funded by the federal government in this case. We have an approved budget to date of $825,000. That covers the consultant's time predominantly, which is the consultant contract value shown on the screen. The remaining balance of the funding is earmarked for other miscellaneous expenses, and that would include payment to private property owners for us being able to rent portions of their property. In terms of construction, we did receive good news recently that $4 million has been set aside for our project. So we're not going to be waiting and wondering if the construction funding will become available. It's already been allocated. We simply need to get permission to use it at the appropriate time. And so council, before you tonight, we have three particular action items. The first is to adopt a resolution for the mitigated negative declaration. This is the State of California environmental document. The second action item is to approve an amendment to the designer's contract. We have construction drawings and specifications that are approximately 80% complete. But to get us over this last hurdle and to have documents ready for advertisement, we do need to amend their contract. That amendment is fully funded by the federal government. The final action item is to approve the plans and specifications. And this is a high-level approval, despite the fact that they are not fully done, but that when we are ready, we would like to advertise the project without delay. In terms of next steps, we are currently working with 7 property owners. Behind me is a screen that shows all 7 property owners. The shaded region is the area we are looking to rent from them. And we will be returning before council in the next number of weeks. We have worked out final agreements with 5 of the 7 having signed their temporary construction easement agreement. And we have tentative agreements with the other 2 and are just finalizing the last couple of them. This is very good news. The fee that we are paying is reasonable. Caltrans will need to approve it, and we'll bring it back to council. And those fees that we will pay to the property owners are also reimbursable through the federal government. So this is all very good news. We've done extensive outreach. I have spent a considerable amount of time working with each of these 7 property owners. We are on a first name, first texting basis, whatever you call it. But they're wonderful folks, and they have partnered with us. This is very much going to be a collaborative effort between Public Works and the community along Southern Heights Bridge. And with that, we are prepared to answer or take any questions from the council.
And thanks for your presentations. Well done. Any questions?
One quick one.
Okay.
I just have one quick question, but first a compliment on the report. I especially loved the historic section. If anyone here is a history buff, deep in there, and it talked about the history in San Rafael around that area was amazing and fascinating. I don't know who did all that work, but very, very interesting. Question, you addressed the removal of the eucalyptus trees in your presentation. Really going on the tail of what we talked about 2 weeks ago. Acacia trees is another one that we've been looking at, and I know that was mentioned in the report. Is that one also being removed? I know it talked about it being right along there. I mean, if we're removing trees, knowing that one that's flammable, again, trying to think forward about wildfire prevention.
So we have identified and earmarked a number of trees to be removed. Those are for constructability purposes, whether, we didn't look so much at the species and whether or not we needed to remove them. This was simply, okay, what is the contractors going to need in order to build the bridge? And so that was kind of the approach.
No, I understand that. Just that 2 weeks ago, we talked about species that we're going to be looking at because of wildfire, and acacia was on there, and you have acacia trees. So I'm just saying we're going to be removing trees if it's in the same place, just to consider it.
That's a great idea. I think we wouldn't mind having maybe the assistant fire chief come up and take a look at it too and see if we need to take it out.
Thank you.
Yes, Maribel.
Looking at the contract with Mark Thomas and Company, the additional increment of $132,000, I'm wondering why that wasn't part of the initial agreement for $717,000. We wanted 100% worth of design, not just 80, right?
No, so very good question. At this point, we have expended a great deal of external effort in terms of not just preparing the plans and specifications, but they are requiring a great deal of detail. Some of the items that were highlighted in the report that were identified many months ago had to deal with particularly electrical lighting on the bridge, what that would look like. Would it illuminate just the bridge deck itself? Would it be overhead? There's a number of requests that different property owners have wanted to have their input in. And so we feel that while we understand that the initial amendment to get us to this point was for final design, we've seen different not hiccups, but we've seen just changes in scope to address some of the community's concerns, to go back and revisit and make sure we're doing the right project, make sure it's the right scope, and make sure that it's approvable by Caltrans. We don't want to run afoul of expanding what we call scope creep, expanding this to include everything, when they may come back and say, no, we're not willing to pay for that particular element. So it's taken a lot of time to do that.
So the amendment is to handle extra work that was unanticipated at the time you did the first contract?
Yes, it was never included in that original agreement.
Andrew.
Yeah. Hunter, thank you for the excellent staff report and presentation. When this came before us a couple of years ago, it came on the heels of fairly, I thought, extensive public outreach, that is, to affected neighbors. And then, of course, we had at least one public hearing here during which we heard commentary from the neighborhood principally, but affected residents. We incorporated that commentary, that is, your public outreach and the comments we heard in public session here, when we made our final decision as a council to green light this project, including the significant components of its design, that is, most significantly, the size and configuration of the bridge, paying heed to the neighbors' concerns that this bridge not turn into an arterial that invites a lot of people to come through it. Having said that, do we still enjoy, by and large, support from the neighborhood for the bridge that we approved a couple of years ago? Or have, you mentioned that there's been a little bit of scope change in response to public commentary. Has there been a change in the public's perception of the bridge that they wanted then versus the one they want now?
Very good question. Overall, I would say the public is generally supportive of this. Since the bridge closure in 2017, I have received a number of phone calls or emails related to whether or not the bridge should stay, whether or not we even have a need for a bridge. It's been very interesting. Several of the residents have called and suggested that it's been quite pleasant having the road closed because they don't have to have through traffic in this area. In discussion with them, I've talked about the needs of the fire department. I've talked about just general safety and having another evacuation route should that need arise. And when looked at in that context, most of the public that I've spoken with about this have been very supportive. We've had some who have requested that the bridge remain as is. Perhaps we could consider rehabilitation and leaving it as a pedestrian-only bridge and not subject to vehicle traffic. That is not an item that Caltrans is willing to entertain. If we were to back out and not construct a vehicle bridge and open it immediately, then the federal funding that we've incurred to date, we would need to reimburse Caltrans for that. But again, I do agree that the public support is there. There's a number of people who use this bridge every day that live in the area. They want to get to Wolf Grade. They want to get to downtown. There is some cut-through traffic, and I think some of that is related to the different technologies of Waze or other apps which guide people through this neighborhood. Our new Deputy Public Works Director and our traffic engineer, we've been talking about that, and maybe how we could possibly reach out to some of the different technological groups. Those are real-world complaints for those who live along the corridor, that there's just too much cut-through traffic. But in light of the safety measures, we do believe that this is a very viable project and supported by the community.
Well,
We
thanks
have been
again. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
We have been working closely with the fire department as well throughout the whole process. So having this open as a access for the fire department is very important for the community as well as everyone else in the area.
I was just going to say that the process is important for the community, and thank you for being inclusive, as Andrew pointed out. And I certainly agree with Kate's comment with regard to not only this project, but as we move forward, eye towards fire danger that we're all going to be addressing. Thank you for bringing that up. It's certainly a valid point for us to all consider. I can't help but think the Golden Gate Bridge took 4 years. I wonder what it would be today. But in any case, light speed is light speed, I guess. Anyone from the public wish to address us on this? Yes, sir.
I'm Steve Gomez, and I'm speaking in behalf of my family. We live at 131 Southern Heights Boulevard, so we're extremely close to this bridge, and we've been driving over it for most of our lives. My main concern is, the only real concern is fire safety. What I am mainly here for tonight is I noticed that there are temporary barricades on the bridge, on both sides.
Right.
The bridge, and they're locked with chains and key locks to the bridge, so they can't be removed. And I think what I have a suggestion is that the local people that do live closely, in case there's a fire in between now and completion of this bridge, that is a key escape route. That's why, that's truly the most important reason of any possible reasons that this bridge needs to be open. And so what I would like to know is if we can put combination locks instead of keyed locks, so in an emergency, that, like my mom, she's 89, she's going to need to drive out of there. She's going to need to go up that bridge. And I think we need to know if that bridge is strong enough to support, in an emergency only, of course, vehicles that have to go across that bridge to escape, as an escape route. So my suggestion is, if you guys want to think about that, and just give these combination locks to the local people that would need to use them in that emergency, and that's about all I have.
Thank you. That's a valid concern. We'll ask at the end of the public comment period whether or not we have a response to that now or need to take into consideration. I think your point's well taken. Anyone else wish to address us on this item? Seeing no one will close and okay, you can come up, please. I'll reopen.
My name is Elise Leyland. I live at 196 Southern Heights Boulevard. And I agree with what Mr. Gomez said. I also think, though, that if you're going to do that, that there could be a little bit of repair work that would be done, because you've allowed it to totally deteriorate now for a while, and it could be that maybe one car would pass at a time, but still that needs to be looked at so that it could have some repair work. The other thing is that I was trying to see which trees were being taken out. I can't see that in what I was sent with this, all the long pages. Apparently it's the trees downhill and the ones uphill that are, screening for the people there, especially a maple tree. Apparently that won't be taken out, but I would like to know those things. Okay. And I also would like to be able to see a rendering of what they want to be replacing with, because originally it wasn't going to be concrete down below, I don't remember. But it seems like it's changed since I first went to some of the meetings about it.
Okay, I'll ask for a clarification. Thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Don Daglow. I'm one of those 7 neighbors who has been texting and everything else with city staff. You asked the question, I thought you'd give you an answer just as one neighbor and only one. Mm-hmm. But my institutional memory there goes back to the 50s, so I'm one of the senior people on the Hill. And I have felt at every step of this process that we have been asked, the people have listened. Every point I've made has not been agreed with, but I always felt that people asked me questions and listened. So just as one neighbor, to give you an answer to your question about how do you feel, as one, I think it's a model of how to make people feel that you listen to them, even if you're not going to like every answer they give you. So thank you.
And thank you for your comment. And made the evening, perhaps. Anybody else? Going once, going twice? Thanks again for the input and reaction and response.
So for some of the comments, Mr. Gomez has requested to have some keys to open the barricades. Now, Caltrans has closed this bridge completely, so putting the public back onto it is a liability issue. But as everybody kind of knows in the room, when we do have an emergency, there is some reasonableness to try to get this thing open and to get people across it. So my recommendation at this point is to utilize our consultant to take a look at the underside of the bridge to see if it's possible during an emergency to allow vehicles on the bridge itself. So we'd like to work closely with Mr. Gomez in the community in order to address his concern and see if we can come up with some answers to address it. Thank you.
With regard to the trees, and you had a chart up there that showed, or a slide that showed that the trees that were being removed. I don't know if that's going to be adequate or not, but maybe revisit that based on the comments.
The trees that are identified here are all on the west side of the bridge. Many of them are located in the backyards, private property of the downhill residents whose homes are off of Pleasant Lane. And Mr. Daglow, who was here just a moment ago, he is the one that lives near the intersection of Meyer, where the eucalyptus trees, where the one fell onto his property. In terms of the other community resident who talked about tree trimming, those trees are on the east side. We're not planning to remove any of those trees. We do plan to, there's a lot of overhanging branches. For constructability purposes, we will need to trim that, and potentially significantly. We've worked with those 2 property owners. They're not here this evening. I've been on the phone with them recently, making sure they're very well aware of this meeting and of the proceedings and of the nature of and impacts to them. We are renting some of these people's private property up front, so they're very well informed of which trees need some trimming. We don't want to get into an argument with a contractor. I don't want to take out more trees that are well established than we have to. But we also need to recognize that a contractor is going to have some heavy equipment, and I don't want that to go swinging around and break a tree unexpectedly. We'd rather have that safety issue removed prior to construction.
And that seems like a reasonable response. If there's other community interest, they could probably call the Public Works Department and talk with one of you gentlemen. Any other comments from council members? Is there a motion with regard to separate and distinct, these three items.
I move approval that we adopt a mitigated negative declaration.
And move and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. And now number 2.
I move that we adopt the resolution number 2. You want me to read the whole thing?
Oh, that's good.
Okay,
I
it's
think I
very
know what you're
long.
referring to. Is there a second to the
Second.
number 2? And move and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. And number 3.
I move that we approve resolution number 3.
Second?
And there's a second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin.
Aye.
Councilmember Gamblin.
Aye.
Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. Thank you, gentlemen. Good job. We'll now turn to item number 7A. And first, I want to make sure we're in sync with our translator. Yeah, are we okay, or? Say again?
You want me to do it consecutive or keep on speaking?
Not everyone has headsets for translation, so I think we're going to have to. Is that okay with you? Does that work for you? Okay, thanks.
Just gonna be a little slow.
Yeah, we'll have to pace ourselves, and that sometimes is difficult. Okay. Item 7A. Andrew.
Mayor, I'm going to start us off with a couple comments, and I'll try to use a slower cadence.
Just pauses.
Okay.
Vamos a hacer un par de comentarios primero.
So the report before you tonight is an informational report. It's on a mandatory mediation and a just cause eviction ordinance.
El informe de esta noche es un informe que para informar acerca de la ordenanza de rentas y de causa justa.
The reason why we're doing it this way is that it's very typical for us to bring an important ordinance to you first as an informational item and get direction from council to make sure that when we bring the ordinance back, it's exactly what you're looking for.
La razón que lo estamos haciendo de esta manera porque es una ordenanza muy importante, entonces preferimos hacer una sesión de información al Consejo y después traer el proyecto para aprobación.
And while other Marin communities have a source of income discrimination ordinance, which the council approved recently in the same format with an informational item and then bringing it back, the county of Marin is the only jurisdiction in Marin right now that has a mandatory mediation and just cause ordinance.
Algunas otras ciudades de la bahía tienen ordenanzas con respecto a discriminación de fuentes de ingresos y entonces la ciudad de San Rafael también está mirando para tener el mismo tipo de solución.
So the county of Marin spent about 3 years, according to their ordinance, before adopting the ordinance, and they just approved the just cause ordinance in December of 2018, so it's been less than 2 months. So again, just in summary, I think what our goal is to get input from the city council so that we could come back and present you with a final ordinance.
La ciudad estuvo mirando por 3 años con pasar la ordenanza y tomaron una resolución hace 2 meses. Entonces hemos estado mirando los diferentes puntos para poder darles un buen informe para poder tomar la autorización final.
All right, I think I'm on.
You are on.
So this
Thank
is going to
you.
help cut down my very long presentation, so this is very positive.
Esto es muy positivo porque va a recortar mi muy larga presentación. Gracias. Thank you.
So I will keep this at a high level. To build on what Jim said, the council said that for 2018, 2019, they want to look at policies that support housing affordability.
Entonces, para el 2018-2019, el Consejo quería mirar a diferentes políticas que pudiera mirar acerca de la accesibilidad a viviendas accesibles.
Our community development director gave a update on housing back in August, and the council directed us to follow up on various housing policies as a result.
Entonces, el director de Desarrollo Comunitario miró a varias opciones que pudiéramos ofrecerles al Consejo con respecto a políticas de viviendas accesibles.
We're going to look at two different rental protection policies tonight, first being mandatory mediation.
Entonces, vamos a ver a dos diferentes políticas de protecciones de alquiler, y el primero es mediación mandatoria.
Mediation in general is a process where a neutral third party helps to facilitate a negotiation between different parties with different points of view.
Entonces, la mediación es un proceso a donde tenemos una persona o partido tercero que es neutral, que ayuda a mediar entre dos partidos.
This is typically a voluntary process, and parties might reach an agreement or they might not. They don't have to.
Típicamente esto es un proceso voluntario y las partes puedan llegar a un acuerdo o puedan que no.
Unless the parties have specified, the mediator will not come up with a conclusion for the participants.
Al menos que especifiquen las partes, el mediador no ofrece ninguna resolución para el proceso.
Mandatory mediation is a rental protection policy that's been adopted by different communities in the Bay Area.
La mediación mandatoria es un proceso de protección de alquiler que ha sido adoptado por varias ciudades en el área de la bahía.
With mandatory mediation, there's often a triggering event that occurs, such as a rent increase or the need for repairs on a property.
Usualmente la ocasión que causa la mediación mandatoria ha sido un aumento de renta o algún reparo que tiene que hacerse en la propiedad.
The mandatory aspect of the program is that parties must agree to participate throughout the process, but they are not compelled to reach a conclusion.
El aspecto mandatorio del proceso es que las partes tienen que participar en la mediación, pero no tienen que llegar a un acuerdo.
As with our source of income ordinance, it is staff's overall recommendation that we consider the county's ordinance as we think about crafting a policy for San Rafael.
Lo mismo que la ordenanza de fuente de ingreso, es la recomendación de los empleados que el Consejo considere una ordenanza adoptada por el condado de Marin cuando formen la política para la ciudad de San Rafael.
With that in mind, I'm going to describe some ways in which the county policy works.
Y teniendo esto en mente, entonces voy a demostrar cómo funciona este proceso.
Mandatory mediation in the county of Marin applies to all residential dwelling units, except for dwelling units owned and operated by the government or with permanent affordability restrictions.
Entonces, la mediación mandatoria sería aplicable para todas las unidades en el área, excepto las que tienen restricciones de accesibilidad.
The triggering event for the mandatory mediation in the county is a rent increase of 5% or more over a 12-month period.
El evento que causaría este tipo de proceso sería un aumento de alquiler de 5% por 12 meses.
To understand how this works, imagine that I am a tenant that receives a 10% rent increase.
Para entender cómo esto funciona, imaginen que yo sea un inquilino que recibo un aumento de renta de 10%.
The law requires that landlords provide tenants with a right, basically with a notification that they have a right to request the mediation service. So I would know that I had a right to this service.
Entonces la ley le demanda al propietario que les den a los inquilinos una notificación del derecho el proceso de mediación. Entonces yo sabría que tengo derecho a este proceso.
I would need to request the mediation service within 10 days of receiving the rent increase notice.
Entonces yo tendría 10 días desde que haya recibido la notificación para pedir el proceso de mediación.
A mediator would need to be assigned within 10 days, and then they would need to schedule a meeting between the tenant and the landlord 2 days after that.
Tendría que identificarse un mediador antes de esos 10 días, y el mediador tendría que notificar una reunión al propietario y al inquilino 2 días después de haber sido identificado.
The mediation must conclude within 30 days.
Y esta mediación tiene que concluirse dentro de 30 días.
As I mentioned, both parties would have to participate in good faith.
Como dije, las dos partes tienen que participar en buena fe.
The landlord could not engage in any sort of retaliatory measures, and I would have to continue to abide by the terms of the lease and pay my rent.
El propietario no podría utilizar ninguna medida en contra del inquilino, y yo como inquilino no puedo dejar mis responsabilidades como de pagar la renta.
Outcomes could be that the rent increase is delayed, the rent increase is lowered, or it could be that there's no agreement at all.
Los resultados pueden ser que el pago de la renta sea retrasado, o que no haya ningún cambio a la renta, o que no haya ningún resultado.
Over the first year of the program in the county, 12 tenants requested mediation services, and 6 were eligible for the service.
Durante el primer año del programa, 12 residentes pidieron acceso al proceso, y 6 fueron elegibles para pasar por el proceso.
2/3 reached an agreement and 1/3 did not.
2/3 llegaron a un acuerdo y 1/3 no.
If the city of San Rafael adopted this program, then because we do not have mediation services at the city, we would need to find someone to provide mediation services.
Si la ciudad de San Rafael decide tener este proceso, necesitaríamos buscar a una persona que ofrezcan el servicio de mediación, porque no lo tenemos en la ciudad.
Staff time would be required to create any marketing materials or educational materials.
Se necesitaría tiempo de los empleados para crear materiales de publicidad para el programa.
And like the source of income ordinance, if a party needed to seek remedies, they could do so through the civil court system.
Y lo mismo que el programa de fuentes de ingreso, las personas que quieren este proceso también pueden pasar por el proceso de las cortes cívicas.
As was mentioned in the staff report, staff has been in contact with the County of Marin's District Attorney's Office, who provides the mediation service currently for the county.
Los empleados han estado en contacto con la oficina del abogado de la ciudad, que ofrece los servicios de mediación.
If the city were to adopt this, at least at the moment, we've been quoted that it would cost $400 per mediation.
Si la ciudad decide ofrecer este servicio, nos han dado un presupuesto de cada sesión de mediación le costaría a la ciudad $400.
Staff projects that there will be significantly more usage in San Rafael than has been experienced in the county.
Y los empleados proyectan que va a haber un aumento importante de cada año de las personas que utilicen el programa.
For one, we have more rental units, but also if just cause is passed as well, that could help increase the utilization.
Por una cosa, tenemos más unidades de alquiler, y también si pasamos la ordenanza de causa justa, entonces va a haber más uso del programa.
There have also been a number of high-profile rent increases in San Rafael, and if a building overall receives a rent increase, every individual in that building or every household could request a mediation service.
También ha habido varios aumentos importantes de alquileres en la ciudad de San Rafael, y si un edificio aumenta los alquileres, entonces cada unidad o cada familia estarían elegibles para el programa o pudieran accederlo.
There are some possible downsides to this program. For one, outcomes are not guaranteed or binding.
Hay varias partes negativas de este programa, y uno es que cada sesión o proceso no llegue a un acuerdo, y que el acuerdo tampoco es enforzable, que tengan que hacer parte del proceso.
Also, by creating a numeric threshold for rent increases, we could perhaps anchor price increases around 5% that might not otherwise be that high.
Can you say that again?
Yeah. By setting an actual percentage threshold, it might lead landlords to go right up to the threshold who otherwise might not increase rents that much.
Si ponemos un límite numérico, entonces los propietarios pueden estar en el incentivo de llegar hasta ese límite.
On average, rent prices have been steadily increasing over the past few years.
El promedio de los alquileres ha estado aumentando en los últimos años incrementemente,
But the rate of increases has slowed down recently.
pero la tasa de aumento ha ido más despacio en los últimos años.
A common question is, does mandatory mediation limit a landlord's ability to raise rent? No, it doesn't.
Una de las preguntas más frecuentes es si la mediación mandatoria limita la habilidad de los propietarios a aumentar el alquiler, y no lo hace.
Additionally, a common question is, does mandatory mediation occur every time that there is a rent increase above 5%? And the answer is no.
Otra pregunta es si la mediación mandatoria ocurre cada vez que hay un aumento de más de 100% al alquiler, y la respuesta es no.
A landlord or a tenant has to initiate the process.
Un propietario o el inquilino tienen que iniciar el proceso.
So that's an overview of the first policy, mandatory mediation, and now we're going to look at just cause for eviction.
Ese es el resumen del primer punto, que es la mediación mandatoria. Ahora vamos a ver el segundo punto, que es el desalojo por causa justa.
Currently, as long as landlords provide enough notification, they can terminate residential tenancy without reason.
En este momento, si los propietarios dan suficiente notificación, pueden terminar un contrato de alquiler sin causa.
Landlords can also serve tenants with a 3-day notice for certain previously identified reasons, such as non-payment of rent.
Los propietarios también pueden servir notificación de desalojo con 3 días por ciertas situaciones, como el no pago de alquiler.
So with just cause, basically, landlords cannot evict unless they specify a reason.
Pero si tenemos una póliza de causa justa, los propietarios no pueden desalojar a un inquilino sin causa justa.
This is a policy that's being adopted by other jurisdictions in the area, and it's a recommendation of the new CASA Compact.
Esta política ha sido adoptada por varias ciudades en el área y ha sido recomendado por el nuevo ley de casa.
As with mandatory mediation, we are encouraging the council to consider what's been adopted in the county as we craft our own.
Lo mismo que la mediación mandatoria, le recomendamos al Consejo que adopten una misma ordenanza como ha sido adoptada por otras partes.
The county's just cause ordinance applies to buildings with 3 or more properties, or 3 or more units, sorry.
La ordenanza de causa justa se aplica a edificios con 3 o más unidades.
There are a number of exceptions, including accessory dwelling units, affordable housing complexes, and other units operated by government.
Hay algunas excepciones como propiedades que tienen unidades accesorias, unidades que están localizadas en complejos de viviendas accesibles y también los edificios que son manejados o administrados por el gobierno.
If San Rafael adopted the same eligibility, it would impact up to 68% of San Rafael renters.
Si la ciudad de San Rafael adoptara esta ordenanza, afectaría al 68% de los inquilinos de San Rafael.
From a landlord's perspective, if I wanted to pursue a just cause eviction, I would first need to obtain all the licenses and permits required by the jurisdiction.
Como propietario, si yo quiero pasar por un proceso de causa justa, necesito buscar todas las autorizaciones y permisos para operar las unidades de alquiler.
At that point, I could then complete a notice of termination and give it to the tenant, and I would also provide a copy to the city.
Como segundo paso, tendría que completar una notificación de terminación y presentársela al inquilino y notificar a la ciudad también.
If the tenant does not vacate the unit, then I would need to pursue the regular process of an eviction and obtaining a unlawful detainer.
Y si el inquilino se niega a desalojar la unidad, tengo que... I'm sorry, can you say that again?
If the tenant did not leave, then I would need to, as the landlord, I would need to pursue the regular process for eviction.
Entonces, tengo que pasar por el proceso regular de desalojo.
Just cause ordinances typically specify for-cause reasons for eviction and no-fault reason for eviction.
Las ordenanzas de causa justa requieren causas para los desalojos y sin falta.
For-cause reasons include failure to pay, nuisance behaviors, or other criminal or illegal activities in the unit.
Razones para causa justa son como falta de pagar el alquiler, comportamientos de hacer cosas que molesten a los demás o hacer actividades ilegales.
No fault reasons would include permanently removing the unit from the rental market or if I wanted to move back into the unit.
Razones sin falta serían como si el propietario quiere sacar a la unidad del mercado de alquileres o si yo me quiero mudar a la unidad o mi familia.
Through this process, there has not been great data about current eviction rates in Marin.
A través de todo este proceso no tenemos buenos datos de la tasa actual de desalojos en el condado de Marin.
The county has created a provision for landlords to provide information about their units in an online registry.
El condado ha ofrecido una provisión para que los propietarios ofrezcan información acerca de sus alquileres en un registro en línea.
This will be done on an annual basis and should help to determine the impact of the program.
Esto lo haríamos en base anual y ayudaría a saber cómo el programa está impactando.
Again, any party that was wrong through this process could seek out civil remedy through the court system.
De nuevo, si alguna persona se siente que ha sido impactado negativamente o malamente a través de este proceso, pudieran buscar remedio a través del sistema de las cortes.
The county is using the business license process to help collect that information, and that process, the city's already doing that.
Y la ciudad está utilizando el proceso de autorizaciones de negocios para conseguir información sobre el proceso.
Like mandatory mediation, there would also be staff time towards creating educational materials.
Lo mismo que el proceso de mediación mandatoria, se requeriría horas y tiempo de los empleados para hacer materiales de publicidad para el programa.
There are potential downsides to Just Cause, including it might discourage investment in rental properties in our community.
También hay partes negativas del proceso de causa justa, como que haría que algunas personas no quisieran tener más unidades para alquiler en el área.
It could also be more difficult to remove difficult tenants.
También lo haría más difícil poder sacar a inquilinos problemáticos.
Again, a common question is, does this limit a landlord's ability to increase rent? It does not.
Una pregunta frecuente es si la causa justa limita la habilidad del propietario a aumentar la renta, y no lo hace.
So as Jim said, this has been a 3-year process with the county.
Como Jim dijo, esto ha sido un proceso de 3 años con el condado.
This is my best attempt to distill a very complex topic into one slide.
Esto ha sido lo que yo he podido tratar de hacer para resumir un proceso muy complicado y ponerlo todo en solo una imagen.
Even though the county passed these at different times, it's important to view these policies as reinforcing each other.
Aunque el condado ha pasado a estas en diferentes fechas, es importante ver que estas políticas se afectan unas a otras.
Mandatory mediation is not going to stop all rent increases, but it creates a new level of face-to-face accountability.
La mediación mandatoria no previene todos los aumentos de alquiler, pero sí ofrece un nuevo nivel de proceso cara a cara.
Even though renters can use this resource and there are protections about using the resource, there's still fear about reaching out for help.
Y aunque los inquilinos tienen este recurso y acceso a poder utilizar estos recursos, todavía hay miedo a buscar ayuda.
If you are a good tenant following all the rules, it makes it easier to access these services and supports.
Si uno es un buen inquilino, es más fácil poder acceder a estos recursos.
It does, however, through Just Cause, it can slow things down for dealing with a challenging tenant.
Pero también a través de causa justa puede hacer más despacio el proceso en lidiar con un inquilino problemático.
Overall, these policies do seem to achieve the council goal around increasing affordability while not overly burdening property owners.
En general, estas políticas sí proveen más accesibilidad y estabilidad sin ponerle demasiado peso a los propietarios.
We will need further legal input for the final draft of the ordinances that we're going to craft.
Y vamos a necesitar más consejos legales para el borrador final de la política.
So tonight, staff is seeking feedback from the City Council about whether or not there is support for these policies.
Entonces, esta noche los empleados están buscando consejos del consejo acerca de si hay más preguntas del proceso.
If yes, are there any ways in which we would want to significantly differ from what the county has done? And also, how do we want to address the cost question for mandatory mediation?
Si es así, hay algunas maneras importantes que quieren hacer algo diferente de lo que ha hecho el condado. And what was the second part?
Just addressing the cost.
Y lo siguiente es cómo abordar los costos directos para implementar las políticas.
It might be a good idea to create a council subcommittee to further refine some of the the nuance in policy.
Sería bueno crear un subcomité para poder abordar los detalles del proceso.
Finally, staff has had some informational sessions with community members, but we could certainly do more public outreach if the council directed us to.
Los empleados han hecho varias audiencias con el público, pero podríamos hacer más si el consejo decide de esa manera.
That's it.
Eso es todo.
Well, first, thanks to both of you. I think you paced that wonderfully. Good report. Our process will be that we'll make a comment or two, and then certainly interested in public input, which will then return to address the questions before us.
El proceso va a ser entonces que nosotros vamos a hacer un par de comentarios y después los vamos a abrir al público para varios comentarios para poder responder a la presentación.
Any questions? John?
So just to confirm how you'd like to do this, I have questions on both the mandatory mediation and the just cause. Do you want me to just go through them all at once time and then move on?
Thanks for the question. Why don't we address either of the two issues since they were presented in their entirety?
Entonces van a hacer preguntas acerca de las dos partes, de mediación mandatoria y causa justa.
Thanks, Andrew, for the presentation. So first question is, of the agreements that were reached, it was one of the first slides that you had with the county that showed the since the year in operation. You said that there were, I believe, 33% where there were agreements reached through the mandatory mediation process of the ones that were actually sought, but you didn't have any detail on what agreements were reached. Were there lowered increases, delayed implementation, et cetera? Was any of that information given to us?
Entonces la pregunta es con respecto a la información sobre los acuerdos que fueron logrados que con el condado y que 33% fueron logrados. Entonces, ¿qué tipos de acuerdos fueron logrados?
Fortunately, like last time, I know at least Debbie with CDA is here, and I think Lily might be here, but they can maybe speak to some more of the details. I know
que Debbie, que está aquí con CDA, puede responder con más detalles a eso.
For at least two of them, I believe, for one, the rent increase stood, but they agreed to a 2-year term, so it wasn't going to be an annual increase again.
What do you mean stood? Oh, they remained.
Yeah.
Con uno de ellos, el aumento del alquiler se mantuvo.
And for the other one, I believe the rent increase also stayed, but they got some additional kind of housing investment on the unit itself.
Y con el otro también el aumento de alquiler se mantuvo, pero recibieron unas mejoras a la propiedad.
Okay. Next question. The mediation costs that would be charged or assessed by the district attorney's office, this might just be a simple question, but why would the cost be borne by the city and not by the two parties that are engaged in the mediation?
Entonces, con respecto a los gastos de la mediación que van a ser asesorados por la oficina del abogado fiscal, ¿por qué tiene que ser la ciudad que tiene que abordar esos gastos y no las dos partes?
And I want to interrupt you for 1 second. I just want to touch bases. Is this working for everybody?
¿Está funcionando para todos?
Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah. That's a good question. It's something that we've discussed as staff, and it's a potential policy question to the council.
Esto es algo que hemos hablado como empleados y es una pregunta que le podemos hacer al consejo.
That would be a sustainable way to fund this, but there might be some legal questions about whether or not we can charge landlords to pay for the service.
Eso sería una manera sustentable para pagar por el programa, pero hay preguntas legales acerca si podemos cobrarles a los propietarios para utilizar el programa.
Okay, I have one last one on the mediation, and then we'll move on to the just cause piece. So if the mediation, this is just kind of a sample, if the mediation is not binding, is there any reason a landlord could not just show up to the mediation, check the box that they were there, and still implement the rent increase without any negative impact upon the landlord as they might see it?
Si el proceso de mediación no es enforzable, ¿podría pasar la situación donde el propietario no participara en el proceso y checara como que se hubiera participado y aumentara el alquiler de cualquier modo?
My understanding is that yes, they could go, not reach an agreement, and that would be okay. Importantly, though, they could not then later retaliate against the tenant for having brought the request.
Okay.
Lo que yo entiendo es que sí, que no tienen que llegar a un acuerdo, pero no pueden hacer nada en contra del inquilino por haber participado en el proceso o requerido el proceso.
Now on to the just cause piece. Would this possibly lead to the need to create a rental board to review just cause questions, or who would folks that have a just cause question or concern go to?
My understanding.
Hold-
Oh, sorry.
Con respecto a la política de causa justa, ¿sería necesario entonces crear un consejo de alquileres para mirar o revisar estas preguntas? ¿O a quién se dirigirían las partes para pasar por este proceso o participar en el proceso?
This would be similar to a source of income where someone could work with legal aid or fair housing to bring a case through the court system.
Esto sería igual como la política de fuentes de ingreso, que tendrían que referirse a legal aid o a otros para poder participar en el proceso.
One of your slides there said that it requires that the landlord, upon submitting a notice of eviction or termination of lease, would also be required to submit a copy to the city. What happens if this part is not followed? They submit a eviction notice to the tenant, but don't submit something to the city. Is there any recourse from that in staying the potential eviction?
Oh, sorry.
En la parte de la presentación a donde dijeron que se le requiere al propietario de dar notificación al inquilino de la notificación de desalojo y tiene que presentar una copia a la ciudad. Si el propietario no presenta una copia a la ciudad, ¿habría algún recurso en staying you mean like maintaining, not the increase?
Correct.
Right. ¿Habría algún recurso para no enforzar el aumento de alquiler?
My understanding is that if the landlord does not follow every step of the process, then the eviction cannot stand.
Lo que yo entiendo es que si el propietario no adhiere a cada paso del proceso, entonces no puede aumentar el alquiler.
And in terms of specific just cause reasons, I didn't notice anything about subletting, over-occupancy, health and safety, and who would determine those? I know there might be in the lease that says I'm leasing to you, but would those things be in the broader sense of violating of the lease if it says your lease is with these people and they sublet or add more people in the apartment, or if there are health and safety issues according to that?
En términos de las especificaciones de causa justa, eso incluiría si el inquilino está alquilando subsecuentemente o sería cuestión de demasiadas personas en el lugar o situaciones de salud y seguridad. ¿quién determinaría estos tipos de situaciones?
That should fall under the breach of rental contract for cause reason. That's the understanding that I have.
Esto estaría por debajo de los acuerdos de contratos de alquiler y si los inquilinos no están de acuerdo, no están con acuerdo con ese acuerdo.
And so my last question for now, as a hypothetical, bringing the mandatory mediation and the just cause back together, if a rent increase is submitted for 10, 20%, whatever it is, or over a limit, and it goes to mandatory mediation, and they don't reach an agreement, and the rent goes into place, and the tenant cannot pay the rent or refuses to pay the increase, this would qualify as a just cause because they've gone to mandatory mediation, they didn't reach an agreement, the landlord is able to implement the rent increase, the tenant does not pay it. That is now a just cause, and they could be given a 30-day or 60-day notice depending upon how long they've lived there.
Entonces, pensemos de una situación hipotética donde hubiera la situación donde un alquiler es aumentado por 10 o 20% más del límite y el inquilino y el propietario pasan por un proceso de mediación mandatoria y no llegan a un acuerdo y el inquilino se niega a pagar el aumento. Entonces esto sería ahora una situación de causa justa. And what was the very last thing? What happens after just cause?
They would need to
They would
be grounds for eviction.
There'd be grounds for eviction.
Sería entonces una razón para desalojo.
That is correct, is that that would be the case at that point. The other thing I added at the end is what happens at the end of a lease term. So if the landlord wanted to raise rent, they did the mediation, the tenant said, this is too much, I don't want to renew the lease, they could then just dissolve the lease agreement and then there would be no need to evict.
Okay. Sí, eso era correcto para la pregunta previa, eso sería el caso. Y entonces sería una situación de terminar el acuerdo del alquiler. Si el propietario decidiera aumentar el alquiler y no llegan a un acuerdo y el inquilino se niega a pagar el alquiler, entonces terminarían el acuerdo de alquiler.
Okay.
I just have one question. So does it make sense for the council to consider an urgency ordinance? I noticed on one of your slides it said when a jurisdiction, what's been seen in other communities, when a jurisdiction has started to look at these policies, that there's been an immediate effect and possibly an urgency ordinance might mitigate that? Sorry.
Sería el caso que necesitaríamos una ordenanza de emergencia. Vi en la presentación que en otras jurisdicciones cuando implementaron esto y hubo un impacto inmediato, necesitaron una ordenanza de emergencia.
I assume you're talking about the two ordinances that are in front of you, or the two concepts. You can do an urgency ordinance if you make urgency findings that it's required, immediate adoption is required for the preservation of the public health, safety, and welfare.
And could that finding, sorry.
Con respecto a estas dos ordenanzas, sí se podría hacer una ordenanza de urgencia con los impactos.
And it does require a 4/5 vote.
But could that be found in this case? Could
That's
those foundings be made?
Can you say that again?
If those findings could be made in this case.
Que si eso sería un consejo que se haría en este caso.
That's for the council to determine.
El consejo debe determinar eso.
Mirabeth?
I have one question on the just cause eviction.
Tengo una pregunta con respecto a los desalojos de causa justa.
You said that this provision is not about rent increases and that it is only to prevent the eviction of what you described as good tenants.
Que usted dijo que esta provisión no es con respecto a aumentos de alquiler y con respecto a los buenos inquilinos.
Let me get to my question. My question.
La pregunta es,
If the problem we're trying to solve is the eviction of good tenants, what evidence do we have that good tenants are being evicted? And if there is evidence, how can we demonstrate the urgency of preventing their eviction?
si el problema que estamos tratando de resolver es el desalojo de los inquilinos y no tenemos prueba de que buenos inquilinos han sido desalojados, entonces, ¿qué provisiones tenemos para prevenirlo?
Part of the challenge has been that we don't have a lot of really good data.
Parte del desafío es que no tenemos suficientes datos buenos.
So the eviction process is basically threefold. There's a 30 or 60-day notice if it's without cause.
Entonces el proceso de desalojos tiene 3 pasos. Primero hay una notificación de desalojo de 30 a 60 días con causa justa.
If someone doesn't leave at that point, there's a notice to quit.
Si la persona no se va durante ese tiempo, hay una notificación de que tienen que irse.
And then if they still have not left, then there's an unlawful detainer.
Y si no se van, entonces hay un detainer. Eviction. Hay un desalojo ilegal.
For these top, bigger first steps, there's no data around this, so it's hard to know.
No tenemos suficientes datos para el primer paso, así que es difícil de saber.
And Councilmember Bushy, if I could add on to that comment, I think part of the logic is also that people may not feel secure going through the mandatory mediation process unless they know that there's a just cause eviction ordinance in place as well, so they're not evicted for not having a good reason. So I think part of the answer is that they're married together.
Parte también de esta situación es que muchas personas tienen temor de participar en el proceso de mediación mandatoria por temor de de que algo les pase por haber participado en el proceso. Entonces, las dos políticas van juntas una a la otra. Si se necesita la protección de causa justa para que las personas se sientan suficientemente confiantes y pueden pasar por el proceso.
But wouldn't it be simpler then to just have a prohibition on retaliatory evictions for asking for mandatory or for requesting mediation rather than casting a net for something that we apparently have no evidence to support that there is a problem?
Can you say that again?
Wouldn't it be easier to address the problem of retaliatory evictions for requesting mandatory mediation by simply prohibiting that type of retaliation for the mediation rather than creating a much broader program for which we have no identified evidence that it addresses a problem.
¿No sería más fácil? Okay. ¿Me pueden escuchar? Okay. ¿No sería más fácil abordar o responder al problema con una prohibición de desalojos por razones de retaliación, en vez de asumir una respuesta más amplia que no tenemos suficientes datos de que resuelve el problema que estamos abordando?
So there is currently a variety of laws at a state level preventing retaliation, but the feedback from a lot of the public meetings has been that it's hard to prove that it's retaliation, and so that could be a reason that just cause is more beneficial because it requires a stated reason for eviction, whereas it's harder to prove it's not happening.
Hay una variedad de leyes a nivel estatal en contra de desalojos de retaliación, pero es más difícil de comprobar de que ha sido así el caso. Entonces, la ordenanza de causa justa ofrece más protecciones.
Sorry. Andrew, you're up.
I've spoken to several members of the community about these issues, and I've asked 3 questions in the course of those conversations. I would like to ask those 3 questions again tonight so that I'm hoping, as I hear from the community, I hear answers to those questions.
Yo he hablado con varios miembros de la comunidad y les he preguntado 3 preguntas. Voy a hacer estas 3 preguntas de nuevo con la esperanza de escuchar algunas respuestas.
Your answers will help me and I hope my colleagues decide. And while I've heard some very compelling stories about people in difficult landlord-tenant situations, those stories are going to be less helpful to me tonight than the answers to the questions I have.
Yo he escuchado muchas historias que han sido muy importantes con respecto a situaciones muy difíciles que las personas están pasando en situaciones de relaciones entre propietarios e inquilinos. Y aunque las historias son muy importantes, esos me van a ayudar menos esta noche que respuestas a estas 3 preguntas.
My first question, how do we, as a city council, as a city, have confidence that mandatory mediation and just cause eviction will work, will be effective, and will overcome any negative consequences?
¿Cómo podemos tener la confianza nosotros como consejo, como ciudad, de que la ordenanza de causa justa va a tener suficiente impacto positivo?
Question number 2, what is the fairest way to allocate the costs of implementing these 2 programs?
La pregunta número 2 es ¿cuál es la manera más justa de poder implementar el gasto de este programa?
And my last question, number 3, why is this matter urgent? If the county spent 3 years examining and analyzing these issues and doing public outreach, and after 3 years they implemented just cause and mandatory mediation, resulting in 6 eligible mediations in the first year, why should we approach this with urgency as opposed to spending more time to analyze it and do public outreach?
Mi tercera pregunta es ¿por qué esto es un problema urgente si el condado pasó 3 años examinando y haciendo alcance e implementando el programa y que resultó en solamente 3 personas aprovechando el programa. Entonces, ¿por qué la urgencia y por qué no pasamos más tiempo investigando y discutiendo las posibles maneras de implementarlo?
Thanks. First, I want to thank everyone for helping us this evening with this issue, which is certainly complex, but we want to approach it in a meaningful way. And you'll help us this evening in doing so.
Primero le quiero agradecer a todos por ayudarnos con este tema, que es un problema muy complejo y les agradecemos por la ayuda en abordar el problema.
Next, I've had a discussion as recent as this afternoon with our city attorney with regard to this matter, and it has been noted that that we need to spend perhaps more time to get it to the place that we need to. There are certain provisions within this county plan on the two issues that he, and I think it's fair to say the staff, are not completely comfortable with. And I don't want to go into details because that might create an issue for the county, but there are some issues.
Justo esta tarde tuve una discusión con el abogado fiscal sobre este tema y él siente que necesitamos más tiempo porque hay ciertas provisiones en el plan del condado que él no está confortable y no quiero entrar en detalles con eso, pero que hay más cosas que tenemos que resolver.
Next, I would like to support the 2 points before us this evening in concept, and I would also like to point out that in effect, mediation is working to some degree.
Y por fin quiero decir que yo quisiera apoyar estos dos puntos en concepto de esta noche y que el proceso de mediación sí tiene buenos resultados.
Recently, I met with two groups, one about a month ago that was facing eviction. Legal aid of Marin got involved, as did an attorney by the name of Jonathan Black from Walnut Creek. I talked with both of them during that process, give them the credit, but the result was that a substantially satisfactory arrangement was reached by the tenants and also the landlord.
Y recientemente me he encontrado con dos grupos y uno es que estaba enfrentando un desalojo y trabajaron con Legal Aid y un abogado de Walnut Creek y llegaron a resultados satisfactorios para todos, el propietario y el inquilino.
And last week, I also met for a second time with a different group from 185 Larkspur, and at that point in time, there was considerable concern, appropriately so, about some eviction notices, 8 of 35 that had been received. And at that point in time, I said that I would talk with David Levin, which I did. I think he's here this evening and may speak. I hope so, David. And I'll let him bring us up to date as to where matters stand. But I also talked with the attorney I made reference to earlier, Jonathan Black, Walnut Creek, because he and David, again, have had discussions. And while they're in the midst of those and therefore not to conclusion, my sense in talking with both of them is that progress is being made. And so perhaps it's not quite as urgent as I felt it was when we met last week.
La semana pasada también me encontré con el segundo grupo y que tenían varias preocupaciones, que había habido muchas noticias de desalojos, 35 notices, 35 notificaciones, y hablé con David Levin, que le voy a invitar a que hable esta noche, y también hablé con Jonathan Black, y los dos tuvieron varias discusiones y hay una sensación de que se ha hecho progreso y siento que hay menos urgencia de lo que pensaba la semana pasada.
And perhaps to clarify, there were 8 eviction notices received of 35 units or tenants. So I'm not sure that's what you said, but perhaps it is.
8 of 35.
8 of 35, yeah.
Que hubo 8 notificaciones de desalojos de 35 unidades.
Thank you. So to me, it's important that we do this right so everybody knows what the ground rules are and they work satisfactorily for our community. And so I will subscribe to the recommendation. We'll get to that later, but certainly at this point in time, subscribe to the recommendation of the city attorney that we spend a little more time to get this right. So it perhaps won't be resolved in its entirety this evening, but the matter will be addressed.
Entonces quiero abordar reglamentos básicos que sean satisfactorios para todos. Entonces quiero suscribirme a las recomendaciones del abogado fiscal a que utilicemos más tiempo para abordar esto, para que sea correcto y suficiente para todos y que sea bueno para todos.
Thank you. And with that, unless there are other comments, I'll ask
Mr. Mayor, could I actually make
Oh, please.
one?
Yes, of course.
Just one follow-up that was in the staff report, but I did not cover tonight. One potential explanation of the low utilization is that it's actually working, and that landlords are not increasing rents high enough to qualify for cases. So that is another, as we're thinking about the effectiveness, it could actually be working really well. It's just not increasing that much.
I was actually going to ask how other communities are finding these provisions. I don't know if you want to answer that now or later.
Later.
Una de las cosas que en el informe de los empleados es con respecto al número bajo de la utilización del programa. También podría ser debido a que está funcionando y que los propietarios no han aumentado los alquileres por la existencia del programa.
Later? Is that me?
Later, yes. But I can add that actually Barry Miller, who's doing our general plan, he wrote the mandatory mediation policy for the city of Concord. So he's a great resource for us.
Thank you.
La persona Barry Miller que está diseñando el plan general fue el que escribió las ordenanzas para la ciudad de Concord y que ha funcionado bastante bien en esa ciudad.
With that, we'll open for public comment, and I would ask that you not repeat one another. We catch on pretty quickly, and also I think Councilmember McCullough's questions were point on, so I'd be interested in those responses as well. So if you would queue up a couple of things.
One thing at a
Oh, I'm
time,
sorry.
please. Entonces, en este momento vamos a abrirlo para comentarios públicos y les pedimos por favor de que no repitan las historias porque nos damos cuenta bastante rápido y que también las preguntas del consejero McCollum serían importantes de ser respuestas.
We have, if you'd introduce yourself, because we are on tape, so introduce yourself. 3 minutes. There are lights on the podium that will indicate green, white, and then finally, we have a number of speakers, so we'd like to hold it to that. Is it 3 or 2? 2 minutes, I apologize. 2 minutes. And then when you reach that, please stop, so I don't have to interrupt you.
Les pedimos a cada uno que tomen 2 minutos para hacer sus comentarios y que hablen claramente porque están siendo grabados y que vean la luz que va de verde a blanco.
Good evening, City Council members, staff, and advisors. My name is Cynthia Long. I live in Contempo, Marin, which is a mobile home park that includes manufactured and mobile homes. We own our homes that are sitting on rented land. So this is kind of different than your typical apartment dweller or other rental situations. And I think that, in my opinion, we need protection from landlords. We represent about 396 affordable income homes in San Rafael and Marin County. Many of our residents are seniors and also young families. Currently, the agency we deal with is HCD, which is Housing Community Development in Sacramento. An individual must file a lawsuit in order to get proper redress against our landlord. This is an onerous burden on people with very limited incomes. There is, additionally, senior renters need protections from our landlords, especially our vulnerable lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender individuals. Some women are also pursuing litigation at this time against the landlord. We respectfully request inclusion in any current rental protections and in any future protections for renters living in Contempo Marin. In addition to renters in San Rafael and Marin County. My first question, so that's my comment, my first question is, where do we get a copy of your presentation? And my second question is, when you were planning this, did you also include places, mobile home residents such as Contempo Marin? Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could, to clarify, if there are questions that do come up that we can address to any of our staff, the attorney, city manager, or the head of our department in this case, we will address those questions or ask them to address those questions at the end, so we have all your points and they'll be addressed at one point in time.
Yeah, is anybody?
Yeah, I need to be able to translate as soon as it happens.
Say again? I'm sorry.
I need to be able to translate as soon as she
I'm
says
sorry.
it.
I didn't mean to interrupt
Yeah,
you. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yes. This is going to be interesting. Sorry.
Okay. So, esta es Cynthia Long, que vive en un parque de hogares móviles y que son propietarios de los hogares, pero están en territorios o propiedades alquiladas, y que es diferente de las personas que son inquilinas, pero que también necesitan protecciones. Son 396 personas que están en estos hogares, y muchos de ellos son personas mayores y familias, y que en este momento están lidiando con la agencia que es HCD en Sacramento, y en este caso los individuos deben presentar un juicio para poder obtener suficientes protecciones. Y esto es un peso demasiado para las personas que tienen ingresos limitados. Adicionalmente, los inquilinos que son personas mayores necesitan protecciones de inquilinos que son predatorios, especialmente las personas, los individuos que son lesbianos, gay, bisexuales y transexuales. Y también algunas mujeres necesitan protecciones. Entonces tenemos pedimos respetuosamente inclusión en las protecciones de alquiler actuales y cualquier protección futura que se puedan ofrecer a los inquilinos en Contempo Marin, que es el parque de hogares móviles, y también con los diferentes inquilinos de San Rafael. Y las dos peticiones es pedir una copia de la presentación de hoy y incluir los inquilinos y los propietarios de los hogares móviles del parque.
Thank you. And let me ask you if I could, because I don't want to make your job any more difficult than it is. Each person will have 2 minutes. Is it okay for them to make their entire presentation and then you translate, or do you want them to
I
stop?
think so. I think I can take enough notes.
Okay, if not, let me know, and,
Okay.
and we'll
How
direct
about
that.
if I give you a copy beforehand?
There you go. Okay, that's helpful.
Good evening.
I'm Pastor Tom Gable of Marin Lutheran Church, part of Marin Organizing Committee. I live in Terra Linda. All those here with MOC, please stand. In December, 28 families in the canal received notice of a 65% rent increase. That's $900 more a month from their new landlord. Then he sent 7 of these families eviction notices with no cause. This story is gravely familiar to MOC, as it's the second time in 6 months that this same landlord has displaced a large group of our neighbors. This individual is wreaking havoc on literally hundreds of lives, including dozens of children,
and renters have nothing that even guarantees them the right to negotiate. Imagine the effect on your life if all of a sudden your housing costs increased 65%, or if you suddenly had to commute from Fairfield, Vallejo, or Richmond. Stable housing is more than an investment opportunity. It is the bedrock of our lives. As properties in San Rafael continue to change hands, these situations will continue to happen unless we do something. MOC urges you to take bold steps to protect tenants like these from homelessness and upheaval. Mandatory mediation and just cause eviction have been adopted by several other municipalities in California as part of a comprehensive housing solution. They have not harmed conscientious landlords or dampened development. During the Board of Supervisors' public hearings, some Marin landlords reported that no reasonable property owner need fear these ordinances. They merely provide renters some options while we work on long-term solutions to the housing crisis. Given the clear and present dangers facing these 28 families and others like them, we implore you to pass these measures. And if the council does need more time, please consider a moratorium on rent increases and no-fault evictions to protect these families. Thank you.
Yo soy el pastor Tom Gable de Marin Lutheran Church como parte del comité de organización de Marin. Yo también vivo en Terra Linda y todos los que están acá que participen con MOC. En diciembre, 28 familias en el canal recibieron notificación de un aumento de 65% del alquiler y esos son $900 más al mes del nuevo propietario. Entonces, él mandó notificaciones de desalojo a 7 de estas familias sin causa. Esta historia es muy similar que ha escuchado MOC. Es la segunda vez en 6 meses que este mismo propietario ha desalojado a un grupo grande de nuestros vecinos. Este individuo ha hecho un problema terrible con literalmente cientos de vidas, incluyendo docenas de niños, y los inquilinos no tienen nada que les garantice el derecho a negociar. Imaginen el efecto a sus vidas si de pronto sus gastos de vivienda aumentaran 65%, o si de pronto tuvieran que viajar desde Fairfield, Vallejo o de Richmond. Las viviendas estables es más que una oportunidad de inversión. Es la base sólida de nuestras vidas. A medida que las propiedades en San Rafael continúan a cambiar de manos, estas situaciones van a continuar a ocurrir al menos que hagamos algo. MOC les urge a ustedes a tomar pasos audaces para proteger a los inquilinos como estos de estar en una situación sin vivienda y de continuos cambios. La mediación mandatoria y los desalojos por causa justa han sido adoptados por varias otras municipalidades en California como parte de una solución a viviendas comprensivas o completas. Estos no han dañado a los propietarios de conciencia o retrasado el desarrollo. Durante las audiencias al público de los consejos de supervisores, algunos propietarios de Marin reportaron que ningún propietario razonable debe tener miedo a estas ordenanzas. Ellos solamente necesitan ofrecerles a los inquilinos algunas opciones mientras trabajamos para soluciones a largo plazo a la crisis de viviendas. Dado los peligros claros y presentes que están enfrentando estas 28 familias y otros como ellos, les imploramos al Consejo que pasen estas medidas en el tiempo más urgente. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much. And I will ask that each of you limit to 2 minutes because the line, the way it's being presented, is twice as long as it might appear, in essence.
Les pedimos a todos que se adhieran los 2 minutos porque la línea es larga y estamos tomando el doble de tiempo esta noche.
Mayor Phillips,
and have some sympathy for our translator. Much beyond 2 minutes is beyond my...
If I may, I just received notification that we believe that all of those who needed translation they all have equipment.
Oh,
so if
do?
I could just request that she make an announcement just to confirm we do have some leftover equipment for a couple people who might need it. Could you just...
Entonces parece que tenemos suficiente equipo para todas las personas que necesiten interpretación. Si pueden levantar la mano, si no tienen equipo, les podemos dar equipo.
So if not, at this point, we can go back to doing simultaneous translation.
Okay. Okay, thanks for that. And yes, please. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. My name is Deanna Cazone. I am a resident of Larkspur Villa Apartments in San Rafael, a community of 26 families that are a family. Let me explain why I say a community and a family. All of the tenants have been in the community for 8 or more years. We are a family not by blood, but by support, by trust, by all things a community has. The reason rent protection is so important is because of the following examples. Mr. Sanchez, a 20-plus-year resident, has cancer and is unable to work, forcing his wife to provide. Mr. Gonzalez, a 10-plus-year resident, is having a baby next month, losing his wife's income. Mr. Rodriguez, a 20-plus-year resident, a pastor, taking any job he can to provide for his wife, daughter, and young son. My finances took a huge hit, and I'm a 10-plus-year resident of the complex. My finances took a huge hit last year when I lost a baby. I could not work. It made it very difficult for me to provide for my mother-in-law in Nicaragua. And there's so many more examples in our community. Without rent protection, our community is not protected, forcing many of our family members to move out of the community and out of the county. Please support renters protection for our community and others like us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If I could have permission to translate this very brief
Sure.
statement, and it'll give our translator a little break, 2-minute break.
Thank you.
Buenas noches, mi nombre es Susi Urrutia. Vine a San Rafael para darle una mejor vida a mi familia en Guatemala. Tengo 12 años de vivir en este edificio en el 185 Larkspur Street, donde recientemente recibimos un aumento de $900.
My name is Susie Urita. I moved to San Rafael 12 years ago from Guatemala to provide a better life for my family. And I live in the building 185 Larkspur that has received $900 rent increase and eviction notices. She's putting a face to this story in the need for urgency.
Soy ama de casa y fui voluntaria en la escuela San Pedro por 5 años, cuando mi hija Brittany estudiaba ahí.
I'm a housewife and I was a volunteer at San Pedro Elementary School for 5 years when my daughter studied there.
También trabajo de limpieza de casa, donde ese trabajo no es tan pagado.
I also work at cleaning houses in Marin County, which is not labor that is well paid.
Soy una de las familias que nos enviaron la carta de desalojo. Para mí me ha causado mucha tristeza. Somos personas responsables y honestas, que nos ganamos la vida trabajando, y todavía viene una persona solo porque tiene dinero, quiere sacarnos sin ningún motivo alguno. Eso no es justo.
I'm one of the families that have been sent an eviction notice, and it saddens me deeply. We're responsible, we're honest, we're hardworking people, and yet a landlord has the right to evict us for no reason just because he has the money to buy the building. This is not just.
Tengo una niña de 11 años de edad, y cuando escuchó la noticia del desalojo, entró en pánico y ansiedad. Nosotros no pedimos dinero, nomás estamos suplicando una ley que nos proteja a los inquilinos. Gracias.
I have an 11-year-old daughter, and we've got the eviction notice. We fell into an absolute panic and anxiety. We're not asking for money. We're asking for laws to protect renters. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask that everyone refrain from applause. We understand the message. It'll expedite, it'll speed the process. Thank you.
Hello. I'm Lynn Simon, a resident who works, shops, worships, and volunteers here in San Rafael. I'm here in support of Susie and her daughter Brittany and husband Leo, who live in Larkspur Villas in Marin with 27 other families. Susie has cleaned my house for the past 11 years. We met right after she moved in and right when she had her daughter Brittany. I've lived here 30 years. The first 25, I commuted from San Francisco in a job that required long hours and extensive travel, neither of which I could have done without Susie and her partner's support. Like Brittany, I'm a first-generation American. My grandparents also fled terrible conditions in another country to come to America to give their families a better life. They were exactly Brittany's age. Thankfully, 3 of 4 of my grandparents went on to live rich and long lives, living to over 100 here. And I was able to take good care of them thanks to Susie and her partner. I'm very lucky, I really am, but I know what it means to be scared, to be victimized, to be persecuted, and I can't stomach what they're going through. In Susie's case, it's a 69% rent increase from $1,295 to $2,200 for an under 500 square foot studio she shares with her husband and daughter. Susie and Leo have made San Rafael their home. Their work is here, their lives are here, their friends are here. In Brittany's case, it's the only home she's ever known. Her school and her activities are here. They're good citizens, and like them, and like how Susie is connected to me, every resident at Larkspur Villas is connected to all of us in Marin, and I feel it's important that you work for with an urgency ordinance, even as you consider longer-term solutions to support these renters and thousands like them in Marin.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sammy Miracle, and I'm with the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, a member of the Marin Organizing Committee. A few months ago, I was dating a woman who was renting a JDU from a family in San Rafael. Her apartment was accessed through the backyard of the main house. I went over to see her one day, and her landlord was working in their garden. Not wanting to startle him since I hadn't yet been introduced, I snuck through the yard to my girlfriend's door. Once I was inside, I asked my girlfriend if she had mentioned me to her landlord so I would know if it was appropriate to introduce myself the next time the situation occurred. She told me no, that she wasn't sure how they would react to her dating a woman. I reminded her that under California law, landlords aren't allowed to discriminate against LGBT people. Well, yeah, technically, she said, but if they didn't like it, they could just come up with another reason to kick me out. And she was right. California law is supposed to protect people from housing discrimination. But in reality, there is no protection if landlords aren't even required to state a legitimate reason for removing someone from their home. Had the landlords decided to kick out my girlfriend, she would have needed to get a lawyer, find proof that she had been discriminated against, which is nearly impossible, all while preparing to move if she was unsuccessful. It was far easier just to hide her identity and our relationship. With housing so scarce, people in Marin have to make terrible choices every day to protect their homes. A just cause ordinance paired with mandatory mediation is the least we can do to give San Rafael residents a little more peace of mind that their lives won't be upended over a landlord's whims or prejudices. Thank you.
And thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, my apologies, I have a transportation issue. I want to first, my name is Peter Mendoza, and I'm the Director of Advocacy and Special Projects for the Marin Center for Independent Living. First, I want to thank you for passing the Fair Housing Ordinance in December. Just cause and mediation go hand in hand with those ordinances. they ensure people will be treated fairly through the process. When people with disabilities and also seniors with disabilities get evicted or receive a notice, we don't have a lot of housing options. Many of us who need accessible housing have difficulty finding it in Marin because there isn't enough accessible, affordable housing. I wanted to mention a couple of things. The mediation process is really important. Hopefully it will serve as an opportunity for tenants and landlords to come up with solutions so that your valued residents can stay in your community. I think it's important as you develop the ordinances that you work on ways that either party will suffer a financial barrier having to pay for mediation. If you're a tenant and you're having to deal with an eviction issue through mediation, you're paying a lot. And in the majority of cases, you're paying a lot of money just for rent. People with disabilities have to pay for a lot of expenses out of pocket to live independently. So we don't want the cost to be the barrier to the process. The other thing that's important to say is through these ordinances, it opens a dialogue so that everyone is treated fairly. And I did want to make one point regarding retaliation. Whenever you exercise your rights, there's a retaliation prohibition in the law. But as was mentioned previously, it's very difficult to enforce. I wanted to mention too, I'm concerned with the use of the term difficult tenant, because whenever you try to exercise your rights and remedies, you often get called difficult. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Peter. Why don't you give him just a moment?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, people of San Rafael. My name is Billy Dufresne, and I moved to San Rafael this fall with my wife after she accepted a job with the county. When we started telling all our families and friends that we were moving out here, we heard two things consistently. The first was, you got to go to Muir Woods, and the second was, isn't the cost of living out there insane? I'm a full-time computer programmer, and literally 2/3 of my paycheck goes to rent every month. We lucked out when we moved here. We found a nice retired couple, and we rent from them. We know them face to face. We help them with chores, take out their dumpsters to the curb. I don't think they would raise our rent $900 a month because they know us. They know our names. They look us at the face every day. So we're lucky. But even though buying a home here is an impossible dream for us, we need to level the playing field between landlords and tenants. Renters deserve just as much rights as everybody else. We deserve to have we deserve to have stability in our lives just like everybody else. We need to level the playing field, and frankly, we need the protections that just cause and mandatory mediation provide for renters. It's not fair for our lives to be completely flipped upside down at the random whims of a landlord who wants to raise rent like that. That's all I got. Thank you.
And thank you.
Good evening. Good evening, City Council members and Mayor Phillips. I'd like to present another side of what we've heard this evening, and it takes about 2.5 minutes. My name's Scott Gerber.
2 minutes, Scott.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'm a resident of San Rafael, business person here in the city. But you probably know me at as the Marin Association of Realtors Community Service Volunteer of the Year. But you probably don't. Everyone wants to paint the housing situation as a battle between owners and tenants, but battles won't solve the housing shortage. Let's be clear, the housing crisis is a housing shortage. San Rafael needs to add 2,000 units. Novato needs to add 1,000 units. If you want the proof that time-tested supply-demand equation works, look no further than Petaluma. By adding 350 new units, rents in Petaluma for the same unit have fallen from 6 months ago. I track rental housing prices and vacancy for 18,000 units in Marin and Sonoma counties, and I'd love to sit on that subcommittee. As a matter of fact, rents in Marin have stabilized and are beginning to decline. Everyone in this room knows the rental market has peaked. It peaked in 2015. How can you create more housing? Don't scare away developers. Mandatory mediation, which is a form of rent control, will run off housing developers and exacerbate the shortage. There's no factual support for such an ordinance, and following a county that has under 1,000 units when San Rafael has closer to 10,000 units is the tail wagging the dog. If that was a good idea, you would have done it. Instead, create a rental services office where renters and owners can resolve disputes. The county and participating cities will share in the cost of operation for that. Next, it's a fact that California has some of the strongest renter protections in the country. A local just cause ordinance will stop owners from renting to anyone with questionable credit or rental history, will make it harder to remove dangerous tenants, will create a costly and time-consuming process, resulting in higher rents and no chance for those with questionable credit or rental history. Good housing policy based on historical success will pave the way for a stronger and more diverse community, a community that workers and employers can enjoy, a community with clean sidewalks, solid infrastructure, and jobs. Today you can take a step in that direction, but not by taking costly and unproven risks. As a resident and business person in the city of San Rafael, I depend on you to show that leadership and wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. 2 minutes, right?
Under 2 minutes. Hi, I'm Joe Friedman and have been a resident and voter in San Rafael for over 30 years. What brings me here tonight is my concern for educators, service, and emergency personnel finding affordable housing within our community. I worked in higher education most of my life. If I was younger, and if any of you have found the fountain of youth, please share, and was offered a teaching position in Marin today, given my resources and family obligations, I could not accept the position due to the housing costs. I believe that ensuring affordable housing is necessary for a strong and vibrant community, with those providing services having the opportunity to be our neighbors. This enriches and is what makes a community. Outsourcing is not the answer. Although the affordability issue is endemic to the Bay Area, and when I view this issue as well as others, such as economic disparity, the environment, I sometimes just sigh and become catatonic. At that point, I look to what I can do individually and locally. By passing these two measures, San Rafael can take a step and make a difference in addressing the housing issue for our community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Abraham. I'm with Fair Housing Advocates, formerly known as Fair Housing of Marin. I'm here tonight representing our Executive Director, Carolyn Peedy, who is not able to be here. She's on medical leave. I'll read her letter. The letter you have in front of you is much more detailed. I'll be brief given the time constraint that I have.
Thank you.
In December of 2017 and 2018, as part of their efforts to preserve housing affordability and prevent displacement, the Board of Supervisors passed first a mandatory mediation, then just cause for eviction ordinance. The mandatory mediation ordinance is aimed at resolving disputes when annual rent increases are more than 5% is sought by a landlord. The just cause for eviction ordinance will prevent the termination of renters' leases without cause, providing greater security and stability for responsible tenants while retaining the landlord's rights to terminate the lease for valid reasons, such as non-payment for rent or other violations of the lease, such as creating a nuisance. Tenants would no longer have to fear that reporting unsafe housing conditions will result in reprisals or retaliation that would cause them to lose their housing or require them to leave their community. Fair Housing Advocates wholeheartedly supports mandatory mediation and just cause for eviction ordinance in the city of San Rafael and urges the City Council to adopt such an ordinance as part of an integrated approach that supports other policies already in place, such as the source of income ordinance. I applaud you for that. Fair Housing Advocates believes this is a crucial step to preserving affordable housing for the most vulnerable populations in the county who are protected under federal, state, fair housing law. The burden of affordability is borne by tenants who are harmed by current lack of affordable housing, and that Many devote more of their monthly income towards the rent in order to live in San Rafael or in the county. At worst, they are forced out of the county altogether or face homelessness. We continue to see those tenants at our agency. For those who choose to stay near their jobs, schools, or support systems that sustain them, the choice is sometimes living in a car or couch surfing. For families with children or people with disabilities, staying focused becomes exponentially more difficult. Implementing a just cause for eviction ordinance that could cooperate with a mandatory mediation ordinance would help limit excessive rent increases and would provide responsible tenants a little bit further. Through all tenants, we assurance that they can have a stable home so long they can abide by the terms of lease or housing provider doesn't have other costs to end tenancy. Limiting the basis for which tenancies can be terminated will help reduce discrimination against in-place tenants and displacement of members' protected classes. Thank you for considering this ordinance.
And thanks for your comments. David, good evening.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Thank you very much also to the city staff for considering this extremely important issue for our clients. And I would just like to focus on the questions that have been asked by council members. First, Councilmember Bushy asked, why not just protect mandatory mediation under the ordinance? And I can report that virtually all the renters we see at Legal Aid of Marin fear use of their rights because of the reality of eviction court and the way it works. Just this morning, in fact, about exactly 12 hours ago at our office, I was meeting with two families with very young children and another staff member. The two families reported deplorable conditions in their housing units. In fact, one of the families decided to move out last weekend because the landlord told them after they complained they had two choices, either pay the rent or move. And when I explained all the different rights and went through the options, the remaining family asked me if there could be any risk of eviction if they make a report to a city inspector. And I had to explain, yes, there is a risk. The reality of eviction court, which is set up for non-payment of rent, it moves very quickly, the burden's on the tenant, very little opportunity for investigation. And so the state law protections provide protection usually just in theory. And this proposal would really provide a measure of security for the most vulnerable renters in Marin. Turning to how we know these programs work, the mayor mentioned our second significant mediation that's ongoing currently, where the owner was very interested in mediation and obviously recognized the potential benefit. We know owners often do once we manage to level the playing field, because in this case that's already been discussed tonight, Legal Aid of Marin has already invested over 100 hours, and I think the Marin Organizing Committee has done the same thing. So that's why that landlord recognized the benefit of mediation. But we need this ordinance to provide protection for all the renters in San Rafael, and Legal Aid of Marin would be very glad to help you in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the discussion we had, David, and appreciate your help on this. Thanks.
Raleigh Katz, Marin Association of Public Employees. We're the union that represents the majority of Marin County employees, some of whom live in this community, many of whom do not live in Marin County, and I'm sure just as many of your employees do because they cannot afford to live here. In fact, they have those commutes from Richmond and Vacaville and other places. We want to join with others who have spoken in support. We have joined with these other folks in the past, and the county and other places urging adoption of meaningful action to help with this housing crisis. We know that the crisis is caused in great deal by a lack of housing. We agree that we need to build a lot more housing. We need to change federal and state tax laws so that people who cannot afford to buy a house like my wife and I were able can actually get public assistance, because as you know, the home mortgage interest deduction is the biggest public housing program in the country. But let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. These are steps that we think will be positive. There is an imbalance of power between the landlord and the tenant. I think your previous speaker pointed out the reality of saying just go to court if you're being evicted just doesn't work. So there's an imbalance of power between the landlord and tenant, and these things may help balance those out. Let me also say, as one who's been involved in labor union work for more than 40 years, mediation is a good thing. A mediator helped avert a strike in Marin County last summer. So mediation often works, and when it doesn't, there's no harm done. So we urge you to consider this. Also, in the terms of who should pay, we would suggest the community, as in the city, pay for the cost of mediation. Tenants cannot afford it. You don't want just the landlord to pay for it, because then it doesn't seem to be a level process. So I think at the cost you're talking about, it's certainly something the city could afford to do. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Steve Sachs, and I am the co-chair of Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative, a member of MOC. I'm a retired banking lawyer. I advise my clients how to do business profitably while complying with the laws designed to protect consumers. My clients, like those in other businesses, weren't too interested in keeping up with legal requirements unless it would affect their bottom line. Until the 70s, credit discrimination based on race, gender, ethnicity, marital status was almost the norm. It was illegal, but it was still almost the norm. Much of it was intentional, but most of it was subconscious. Then in the mid-70s, Congress passed the Equal Credit Protection Act. And in response to your question, Mr. McCullough, the most important part of that act was to require that creditors state a reason why you didn't get the credit card or why your account was closed. And so what happened was real reasons had to be generated. Right now, you've heard several people talk about fear of retaliation. That's illegal too. But the tenant has no way of knowing what the cause of the eviction was unless the landlord is going to be forced to make a statement with one of the reasons that you come up with on the list. The county's list is a good one to start from. And if it's specious, the tenant has a good case. If it's not specious, the landlord wins. But it resolves the problem by making the landlord state the reason, whether it be non-payment of rent or your behavior is bad, but you've got to be comfortable with the statement, or you better find another reason or change your mind altogether. That has been my experience. I practiced that my whole career. The banking industry was very upset with these laws, but within about 1 or 2 years, they became very comfortable with it. It worked. In response to the person, the landlord spokesman, I agree with him. We need affordable housing, but we can't wait. This can't wait.
Thank you for your comments.
Good evening. Thanks for your time tonight. My name is Lisa Doring. I'm a Marin County resident. I've been here for 22 years. I've lived in San Rafael for about 6 years now, and I really love it here. I'm here as a representative of a chapter of SURGE here in Marin, showing up for racial justice. And I'd like to bring an issue forward here. In the race count study that was published last year, we unfortunately ranked #1 in racial inequity of any county in the state. And one of the factors that caused this ranking is housing. Latinos in Marin experience almost twice the rate of low-quality housing, such as lack of available kitchens, plumbing, and heat. The median household income for white people in Marin is $91,000, while the median household income for Latinos in Marin is almost $50,000, which is slightly more than half of white people. White people in Marin average $52,000 of income left after renting household costs, while Latinos average only $16,000 of remaining income, 68% less than white renters. The issues here tonight are about all renters throughout San Rafael, but we are seeing a disproportionate number of people of color being affected by landlords who are acting in unethical and discriminatory ways. Enacting these ordinances will help protect the most vulnerable people in our community. If we use the standard of 30% of our income for housing costs, the average white family in Marin can afford $2,288 in monthly rent, while the average Latino family here in Marin can afford only $1,243 a month. A quick scan through Craigslist brought up only a few studio apartments or tiny cottages in that price range, certainly not large enough for a family. Please act to enact more ordinances to protect our neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor,
Phillips and member of the City Council. Alex Calvin, California Apartment Association. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and speak to you this evening. We submitted a letter of opposition to the just cause eviction policy, so I won't go over that again, but I did want to add a couple of things that I heard in some comments. I think the comment that just cause eviction would lead to more affordable housing, I really question that comment, because in some cases, it may lead to the opposite. I think facing a possibility that just cause becomes law, that some landlords and property owners may actually become a little bit more, will do a little bit more screening on who they take on. And this will create more of a problem, I think, and perhaps more of a problem they were trying to solve. I think that's just the reality of what may happen. And other communities have certainly discussed this issue. And some of them, like Marin County, decided to enact just cause eviction. Others have passed on it because they were worried about some of the consequences. So I would caution you to maybe proceed slowly. And I will sort of second the notion that your staff laid out in your staff report that perhaps a subcommittee is a good idea, but I would also suggest that perhaps you may want to consider putting a tenant group and a landlord property owner group rep on that committee, because ultimately whatever we're trying to solve here will have to include both sides talking. You won't come to a solution by legislating something. Both sides have to agree on what is workable for everyone. That's the only way this is going to work. We're not downplaying the housing issue in California. We agree more homes need to be built. I also recognize that tenants face some significant challenges, and we certainly want to be part of the solution, but there has to be an avenue to have a conversation, whether it's putting a table in the room, putting the right people in the right place, and just talking. So just a couple more seconds, if I may. I take less of an issue with the mediation program because I do think there's some benefit of forcing people to talk to one another, and I recognize it's not binding, but I do think that just by having people talking, it's a positive thing. So we would love to talk to you some more about being more involved on some possible solutions. Thank you.
And thank you for your letter. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Romeo Arrieta, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Marin Association of Realtors, and I have been here for 1 month. I may be new to the Marin Association of Realtors and San Rafael, but I have over a decade of experience working with city councils and city staff on policies that help property owners, homeowners, and future homeowners. Our members are in a unique position in that they serve both tenants and landlords. I look forward to working with San Rafael City staff and council to ensure that the nearly 1,400 members of the Marin Association of Realtors are represented in these discussions, and I will be reaching out in the near future. And I ask that Marin County Realtors be included and involved in this process as council and staff review this issue, whether they have a subcommittee or any other group that talks about this. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, and welcome.
Council members, Mayor, my name is Omar Carrera. I'm the Executive Director of Canal Alliance, a landlord and important employer in East San Rafael. I believe that the adoption of these policies definitely would not make the housing increases disappear. But tenant protections are a cornerstone to solve this crisis. Now, I'm going to try to answer the 3 questions that you asked, Andrew. And I'm going to change the order because I think in 2 minutes to answer all of those questions, I think that is the fair time to do that. Data to prove it works? Yes, a lot of information, because affordable housing has a strong link with local economy. And I can follow up with you to show that information that works. From the county, we have here already the positive results, and you shared that. They maybe by the mandatory mediation is actually is working for tenants and for landlords here. So I would love to include that data that is already available in the county to share that. who pays for that? I'm pretty sure if you ask an individual here in San Rafael, what are your choices, to split the cost or be evicted from your home? I'm pretty sure that a lot of people would choose to split the cost. So I think that's something that we should continue discussing. If it causes is going to be an impediment for the city to adopt something like that, that should be one of the considerations to have. And now you mentioned about the 3 years they took this, the discussion that the county took that. And I have the same question, but perhaps with a different twist on that. Why 3 years to debate this and this issue? And let me tell you, my personal assessment of this, it was not because of the technicalities. I would like to hear what are those concerns that you have, Mayor. But for me, it was more about the lack of the political willingness to make these decisions. So, when you ask that question, I'm really concerned that we are creating this false sense of that we have all the time of the world to decide on this. And I don't think we have too much time. There's a lot of families being evicted every single day. So I think it's time for once to start working on the people's right first. Thank you.
Thanks, Omar.
Good evening, Council,
David.
Mayor. I'm a landlord in San Rafael. I've been so for about 11 years. I couldn't agree more with Omar's remarks, and to bear down on one more of your questions, Councilmember McCullough talked about the negative impacts potentially of this, and I think that's upside down. You might take a look at the multiples of apartment sales in the county versus San Rafael. Multiples are result of interest rates and expectations of the economy. My understanding is the multiples are pretty hardy right now, on top of pretty good rents. So landlords like me are making bank. And I think it's unfair for Prop 13 and the mortgage interest rate deductions to be bestowed on landlords without some responsibilities. And I think the responsibilities that we're talking about tonight have in fact been discussed at the county level for 3 years. All of you have been around during that discussion. You've heard the pros and cons, and you've now have had some year of it being experienced. I don't think we have time to wait. I think every year the rents go up, people find it harder to live here, we lose diversity in the community. There have been 2 incidents just in the last 4 months of egregious increases in rents without any recourse or protection for the tenants. Do the right thing for the people, please. Thank you.
And thank you.
Hello, my name is Victor Kunin. I am a resident and landlord in San Rafael. I live in Gersel Park, and we rent 6 units on the same property where we live. We never evicted any tenants, but the current proposal will take a big problem that is housing affordability and make it worse for everybody, but particularly so for the very people you are trying to protect. So let's start with that. Until 6 years ago, I was a renter, and about 6 years ago, we bought one property in San Francisco. It was a very distressed property, and we hope to rehab it. It's a rent-protected city. We were not able to rehab it. As soon as we realized that within a year, we bought a property in San Rafael. It was very distressed property in a city without rent protections. We rehabbed it. The property is perfect. All our neighbors are very happy about that. All our tenants are very happy about that. As I said, we never evicted anybody. Now, how it's going to make it worse for the people that you are trying to protect, right? So we had people approaching us for tenancy all the time. So we had people that we accepted as tenants. We have a convicted criminal on probation with no credit history. We had fresh immigrant without any credit history. We had young people with no credit history whatsoever. and we had people with tainted credit history. We do not accept any of those categories in San Francisco, because in San Francisco, we have no recourse if there is a problem. In San Rafael, we take the risk and we accept them because we have an option. And the option does not include a lengthy process. We can give them a chance. If rent controls are enacted here, those chances will be taken away from those people. It will also make it worse for everybody, but I don't have time to go into it. I would like to be on the board, and I would like to explain how it will make it worse for the existing tenants, for the landlords, for the city, for the commuters, and for everybody else. Please take me on the committee.
And thank you for your comments. It's helpful.
Good evening. I'm Bill Carney. I'm chair of Sustainable San Rafael and a very fortunate homeowner in Gerstle Park. We encourage you to move forward with these rental protections. Ask staff to complete their due diligence and come back to you with a strong and viable ordinance. To Councilman McCullough's question number 3, San Rafael has a head start in terms of timing. The county's model is reasonable and well thought out. We can conserve city resources of money and time by using that model and by partnering with the county on renter protection as we have in addressing homelessness. We commend staff's excellent memo for placing renter protection squarely in the larger context of San Rafael's housing shortage. What jumped out at me was that nearly 9 of every 10 people who work here don't live here. We need more workforce housing to support our economy and our environment, and most importantly, to sustain the economic and cultural diversity that's core to the character of our community. Let's show how our local governance is up to the challenge of creating more housing at all income levels protected by fair housing policies. To question number 2, a cost of $400 each is a reasonable use of public funds for public benefit. To question number 1, you cannot legislate certainty. However, you can, as legislators, craft and take reasonable steps forward to progress and to create the best possible community. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Jesuina Perez Teran, and I'm very glad to hear that the San Rafael City Council is moving in the right direction. I remember over 10 years ago when Mayor Borough was here, and it was Mayor Phillips. Congratulations, you're now, it was Council Phillips.
Yes, thank you.
So I'm so glad to see that the city of San Rafael is moving in the right direction. We stood here for several years asking for the city for some tenants protections, meaningful tenant protections that will ensure that people will have, affordable housing and housing in good condition. And no policy is perfect. And I'm sure that we're going to find glitches with what you approve eventually. And I know you're going to be taking time, but I would say take a little bit of time just to study this, but don't take too long because tenants protections are long overdue. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Mayor and City Council members, my name is Douglas Mundo. I'm a resident and a tenant as well from San Rafael. I'm also representing the Marin Environmental Housing Collaborative and many other hats that I always use in the community. So you know me. So urgency, I will start with the number 3 question for Supervisor McCullough. I have been living 18 years in the community, and this issue has been the same, 18 years. If 18 years doesn't mean a sense of urgency, I don't know. I need to find another way to make sure that you and the city council member understand that this is an urgent issue for the most vulnerable communities in San Rafael. The second part, I will say I will go with the number 2 question about what can we do to reduce, to pay for the cost. I think we can create some, there should be enough creativity to make things happen. I just make some numbers really quickly, while we were listening when people were talking about. For instance, if we assume there's going to be 100 people, that will benefit out of, a process like this, we're talking about $40,000 a year. I mean, $40,000, we can figure out how to make it happen. And I know from public and private, support, we can make it happen. And like Omar said before, some people probably will be willing to share the cost of these expenses. I think $40,000 for San Rafael, come on, it shouldn't be an issue. As the money shouldn't be an issue to support this ordinance. And finally, the UC Berkeley urban displacement researchers have mentioned that just cause is only one of the 14 policies identified to keep vulnerable communities in place. So there are some researchers that have provided a lot of information that could, help us find out the best way to resolve this issue in Marin County, especially in San Rafael, because we know the issue of housing is big, and we haven't done too much about it to resolve it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. John.
Yes, John Reynolds. I live in the canal. I've experienced the terrible hurt the people have experienced in the canal for many years. The ice raids, the housing shortage. It's a bigger issue, of course. Housing, we need to have housing. What about the hotel that's been proposed for the canal? Why not make a priority affordable housing for people? That's important to consider. We need to move forward. This is an urgent issue. These people that have been put out of their houses, it's just horrendous. It's absurd. It's offensive. It's not Martin Luther King. This is a time of Black History Month. Martin Luther King said, justice delayed is justice denied. 18 years that Douglas says we've been dealing with this. We need to act on it now as quickly as possible. Justice delayed is justice denied. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else wish to address us on this issue? See no one, I'll close public comment and return to council, perhaps starting with some of the questions that came up. You might have recorded some, I did, and I can go through my list if you wish, and hopefully you can address some of them, if not all, and we can get back on those. First, copy your presentation. Where can we locate that?
That's the easiest one. Yeah,
I thought I'd start with the easy one.
I have her, I think she might have left, but I can email this to her, and then we can post it on the website. And then she had the other question about would this apply to Contempo Marin, and
Correct.
it would. At least mandatory mediation, that would apply to all units if we were to emulate what the county did. And then those were the.
Could I just add on
sure.
Contempo Marin? We do have a rent stabilization ordinance for Contempo Marin and the other mobile home park. And that actually, I think, probably provides more protection to those residents. The park owner is allowed to raise the rent a certain amount of a fraction of CPI year to year, but anything above that, they have to petition to the city and then go through an arbitration process if the tenants want to. So, which does come out with a decision by the arbitrator. So I think while this would apply, I'm not sure it would actually help more than the protections that are in place.
And the point well taken, I was going to mention the same. It's unique with regard to Contempo because it's the only section in town that we have, in fact, rent control through much discussion, let's say, over the past. Expensive discussion. Just cause, is that going to increase or decrease the number of rentals?
I'm happy to follow up and do some more research on what's happened in other communities. Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest answer at this point.
What do you think about a rental services office?
The speaker might need to maybe elaborate a little bit more on what the idea there was, but it seems to me just for the long-term sustainability of this, the more that we can kind of outsource that type of service and then also sort of synergize with what the county's done, that seems like the most sustainable approach. So at this time, that's kind of what I would recommend.
With regard to the cost of approximately $400, how do you feel about funding of that? There are three possibilities, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or combination thereof.
Well, we could certainly continue to try to negotiate that. So that was kind of a first ballpark that they provided with us. So we could try to go back and have more of a conversation about what that would look like. I will say the normal hat I wear is, homelessness.
Right.
And compared to some of the costs that we incur there for programming, this is sort of the ultimate upstream prevention of homelessness. So I think that, $400 versus some of the outcomes that we might get on our other homeless contracts, I think that's something to strongly consider as we think about funding this.
Part of the reason for asking the questions, excuse me, I think demonstrates that while we know a lot about this issue, certainly you do, and thanks for your work on this, still there are some points that need to be addressed. Many brought up this evening. I feel that we do, in fact, need to advance the issue, but need to address some of these basic points. And in a little bit, I will recommend an ad hoc committee made up of Andrew McCullough and myself to help in that process. We talked last Friday about it, and so it would be, to me, a logical extension of that. I've got some other points, but I'm going to open it up to council members. John? Kate? Annie? Sure.
Yeah, I have comments.
Go for it.
I know the mayor already said this, but thank you for everyone who came out tonight. We heard both personal stories as well as professional expertise, so thank you for coming out on Monday night. For me, the two examples that have been referred to are the Larkspur Apartments. A 40% increase is just unethical at the end of the day, and I have that written here. And so as I sit here, it's what can we do as a council and a community to ensure that that doesn't happen. And I don't want to have to legislate ethics, but at some point, I think we have to step in, and that's what I think we need to be doing here. I think we're late to this party. When I look at the staff report, just cause policies, the oldest one listed was 2004 in San Diego. I'm sure we could find ones that go farther back. And I have another one here for mandatory mediation, Palo Alto, 2001. I mean, this is 2019. I think we've waited a long time. The county's worked on this for 3 years. You can watch their videos or conversations like I did, so I know that it's been vetted. I know that the supervisors worked on this and really talked about it with the community and came forward with two policies that we're looking here tonight that are great templates. And that for us to have this as an urgency ordinance, to have that as a starting place, we can refine urgency ordinances. But we need to act. I think it's not like we are starting an area that hasn't already been, that hasn't started. As I said, the Marin County has already been there and many other cities and towns. And while I appreciate the willingness to do it right and do it accurate and get all the information we need, and I loved, I can't remember who said it, it's like, don't have perfection be the enemy of, good be the enemy of, the saying I'm trying to say. Basically, it's don't try to have everything so perfect that you don't act at all. I think we need to be bold here. 2 weeks ago, we talked about being bold in terms of wildfire prevention. This is a place to be bold. And we talked about funding then. We will figure out the funding. I think of those families that are affected. I have my own family. I can't imagine sitting on the sidelines another day and not acting. So I would hope that we come forward as soon as we can with a draft ordinance that's an urgency ordinance, and we leave room to change it as needed as we get more information, but to not wait any longer.
Maribeth.
Thanks.
More than welcome.
I share the sentiment on our renters. I was a renter for a long time. I understand what it's like to have your housing contingent upon the whim of another. However, we need to make decisions that focus on the broader problem. The problem is not landlords, the problem is a shortage of housing units. As we've heard described, the way to get rents down for everyone is to increase the supply. So we need to think very carefully about every action we take. What will the impact be on the supply? So far, we've heard questions raised that perhaps there's a risk, a long-term risk, that we will diminish the supply of housing units available. And that is the exact opposite of the result that we would like to achieve. Seeing as many are quoting from others, I think I'll go to Hippocrates. What is it? The Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm. We need to make sure that we're not causing more harm than good. And right now, questions have been raised about what possible consequences of our actions. That's why I think we should focus on actions that both sides, based on the testimony we've heard tonight, agree on. And that seems to be the mandatory mediation, to bring the parties together to talk face to face. We've not heard any potential risk created from that. And it does exactly what we want our community to do, to talk to each other about the basis for a rent increase. I know a 40% rent increase is shocking, but I understand those numbers are high, but we don't know what is behind them.
Please.
But you don't.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, let her speak. We
Yes.
listen intently with you.
We respectfully listen to you. Please respectfully listen to me. Landlords have financial needs. They need to be able to get funding. They need to be able to finance their properties. They need to be able to repair their properties. They need to pay property taxes. We don't know what's behind those numbers. Now, I'm skeptical that they can be mathematically justified, but maybe they can. And the way to find that out is to bring the parties together. And that's what mandatory mediation does. I think that it has the most potential for bringing the parties together to promote understanding and promote what we want in our community amongst our renters and our landlords. That's where I think we should focus our energy. Now, I understand that there's a fear of retaliation. If you ask for mandatory mediation leading to eviction, I think that can very simply be solved by putting in the mandatory mediation provision that there can be no eviction without just cause for 6 months after a mandatory mediation request. That way you get the protection, the renters will have the protection, they won't be able to be evicted without just cause for 6 months after they request their mandatory mediation, and that will bring the parties together to discuss the issues. So that's where I think I would like to see our staff focus our energy on getting more information about how we can put together a mediation program that works for both parties and achieves those goals. And on the issues of cost, I understand that we would like to be able to fund this. However, we have a lot of services that the city provides, and in every instance where particular people benefit, they pay those fees. I know, having spent a lot of time on the Planning Commission, all of our buildings fees, permit fees, everything is paid for by the people asking for the service. So I don't see any justification for us deviating from our general requirement that the users of the service pay the fees in this instance. We have a general rule, and I think that's what we should abide by. Now, we can come up with ways to share the fee, and the first step, of course, is get the fee down, get the cost down as much as possible, and then share it between the parties to give them an opportunity to share that as well.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, to everyone for showing up today and providing us with information. I think that those who have followed the county for the last 3 years plus have a good take on what they've heard. But to Mary Beth's point, we still need to do our due diligence as well. There is a certain amount of information that we don't know that we'd like to get more information on about specific things. To the question of rent increases of 40, 65, 70%, whatever that is, I strongly agree that we need to find out what's behind those numbers. When a person invests risk capital to buy a property, they expect a certain amount of return. And I'm not going to be the one who says what that return is going to be, if it's going to be capped at 5%, 6%, 7%. They make a decision based upon their own finances, what they want. And if they feel that it's a good opportunity for them to buy and to get a certain amount of return, it's not for me to say that's not. It's in a market economy where they are able to buy a piece of property, take the risk involved. That could turn just as much as they could make a positive out of it, it could turn a negative out of it. And we've seen that happen numerous times throughout the economic cycle. The person will buy a building, the economic cycle will turn, and they lose the building. They lose all the risk capital that they put into it, and they took that risk. So that can happen. Yes, they can make money on it. That's their goal. That's their investment. Just like someone wants to make an investment in a stock or a bond, they're taking a certain amount of risk for it, and they're getting a certain amount of return and a potential for loss. So I can't begrudge necessarily a landlord without knowing all the facts on why they need to increase. It might be that there hasn't been a rent increase of more than 2 or 3% for the previous 5 or 10 years, and yet the market has dictated that it could have been 5%. And now they need to go in and do improvements on those properties. So they buy the property, they do improvements, they have requirements that they need to fit, and that means that they shouldn't have to absorb all those costs. And if it's allowed for them to recoup some of those costs that they put into that property in the form of rental increases, I'd like to understand where those numbers come from. I'm not for saying that a person should be able to just charge whatever they want without any justification, but I'm also not saying that 40% increase might not be justified. I just don't know. So without having that information in front of me, it's hard for me to say, this is egregious or this is not egregious. The fact that the county settled on a 5% increase to trigger the mandatory mediation, well, the CPI, in the San Francisco Bay Area just for housing last year was 4.6%. Okay, so if those costs increase at 4.6% and the landlord can now only raise 0.4% to keep up with the cost of having that housing, then how is that fair to them without incurring a mandatory mediation if they want to go 6%, if they want to go 7%. So I don't know if that 5% is the actual the right number if there was to be a mandatory mediation piece put in place. I'd like to do more research on what that would be and get input from those. I saw in the staff report that I think Concord was 10% threshold before there was a mandatory mediation clause kicked in. I don't know what that number is, and I don't know how the county got to that number, and if they've been studying it for 3 years, that might have been justifiable when they first started looking at it, but it might not be now. So, and I don't know if that's a flexible piece. So there's a lot of questions that I have, and while I'm in agreement that getting people together to talk, to discuss all of these matters is a good thing. It's always good when people have a chance to get more information and to talk. I don't know that what we're suggesting in terms of an ordinance will actually, the questions that I have not answered whether or not they will actually do anything. The fact that a person could say be mandated.
No, I'm sorry. Stop. Stop.
She's just saying,
What?
Gary, she can't hear.
I apologize. Can we take care of that? Is it okay now? Okay, John.
Where was I? So in terms of the balance between the mandatory mediation and turning into the just cause, I don't think my concerns and questions have been fully addressed, and it's not for lack of an attempt. It's just that I don't see that there's any binding teeth to any of this, so that if we go ahead and implement a mandatory mediation, as I asked, and the landlord shows up and says, nope, I want to go ahead and raise my rent 10% because I've put this much into the property and I need to recoup those costs and I need to have a certain level of return for my investment, I'm entitled to that. And then they go back out to the tenant and says, I'm going to raise this 20%, and the tenant says I can't pay that. Well, then they can evict them for lack of payment. It's pretty straightforward that people that are maybe don't have any nefarious intent of doing things, but they want to have a certain amount of return on their investment, that they're still going to be able to do that. And there's nothing in this ordinance and there's nothing in the mandatory mediation that would prevent that from happening. So we can write an ordinance and say the things that we want in it, but if it doesn't have any extra requirements that says you can't do this, then I don't know that it's worth any more than the piece of paper that it's currently written on. So I don't know that we need to, if there's a way that we can make this work where we get input from the landlords and the tenants together to come to some sort of agreement where it is fair on both sides, and that's what we're hearing from both parties. I don't know where that number comes down. I don't think we have the information yet. So once we get that information and what time that takes, I don't know. It could be 30 days, it could be 60 days, it could be 6 months. Hopefully it wouldn't be 3 years like it took the county. We can, probably bypass some of the other information if they've done that and just update it. But I don't think it's going to be something that we have all the information available to us now to suggest an ordinance that would come back to us 30 days from now, ready to vote on, and with an urgency ordinance requiring 4/5. I'm speaking for myself, but I wouldn't be supportive of an urgency ordinance now to get that on place without having the proper information and the proper due diligence done by our staff. That's the comment I have.
Thanks, John. Andrew.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody who showed up this evening. I really appreciate the thoughtful comments we heard from tenants in particular and their advocates. And then also I especially appreciate the efforts on the part of some to answer the questions I had at the outset. I heard some things that I hadn't considered before, and I do appreciate that. And I also applaud the courage of the handful of people here representing landlords for their courage to show up and speak their turn as well. This was brought to us as an information item, but along the way, prior to this meeting, we've been encouraged by folks in the community to treat it as an item of great urgency and to convert what is an information item into either a moratorium or an urgency ordinance or potentially both, so that we act with real dispatch. I'm very open to the idea of mandatory mediation and just cause eviction. When I say I'm open to it, I'm open to not perfection, but something that achieves the goals of our community without sacrificing the things that we also desire. For example, as my colleagues have pointed out, an increased supply of housing. So what I'd like to do is act with a sense of urgency, but not necessarily by way of an urgency ordinance. We needn't take nearly as long as the county took, but I do agree the county has paved a path for us that we can look at as potentially a model or a template for our moving forward, subject to revisions that do two things. One, address the peculiar concerns of our community, and two, close the gaps or answer the questions that are obvious on the face of the ordinance passed by the county. Just in my quick review of their implementing language, there are questions to me that have not been answered this evening, either by staff or by members of the community, and that's going to take a little closer examination to ensure that we have the answers we need. So my feeling right now is let's move forward with a committee or subcommittee. Let's do the hard work that we need to do, and let's do it as quickly as we can so that we come up with solutions that are right for the community.
And thank you for that. First of all, it's not going to take us 3 years. We don't fool around here. We'll be moving on this expeditiously as quickly as I think is reasonable. I did discuss this matter and that we meet, we being the city manager, its vice mayor, Andrew McCullough and myself on a Friday basis. We discussed it to a little bit of degree on Friday, not to conclusion, but it strikes me that more needs to be done, amplified by our city attorney emphasizing to me from Atlanta. Guess why? His view, which I greatly respect, and certainly the department, that more needs to be done to make sure it's tailored for our particular community. We want to make sure that it's done right. And so I'm more than willing to devote that extra effort. I am pleased, quite frankly, and I don't want to go too far out on a limb, but I am pleased with the discussions that have taken place thus far with regard to 185. Fingers crossed a little bit, but we have very confident people in David, and I think the other side working through, and I hope that that's to a satisfactory conclusion, mitigating to some degree the urgent nature of this matter. So I'm comfortable that we can step back and do it right. And I am also interested in a point raised by several, and that is involving, rather than just 2 or 3 of us, a couple of representatives from both sides, if you will, to better understand and make sure that it does in fact make some sense when we come back to this committee, or rather this board, and the council itself will of course approve any action that is decided upon that will help facilitate that, I would hope. A couple little things, costs, I think that's probably appropriate for this city to pick up, but we can discuss that and make a recommendation. I too am in favor of the concept that have been presented this evening, once refined and some of the questions answered that need to be, in my view. I do think that we're going to get to a better place, but we also need to be cognizant, aware of the issues that Councilmember Mary Beth Bushy brought up. That is, we want to make sure that we do this and do it right and encourage, in the aggregate, encourage more housing and not discourage, as some communities have faced, and it's a downhill spiral from that point. So let's make sure that in fact we do this right. Having said that, let me just lay this on you. This is a little bit involved, but it's something I'm concerned about, and I think as a community we need to start to think about, and certainly the City Council will be, once I get it a little better formulated, but I'm going to just throw it out there. We know that there's one opportunity zone in Marin County. It happens to be in the canal. The opportunity zone sounds interesting because it encourages investment within the area, and that sounds also encouraging because we know many of the units need to be upgraded, improved upon. The conditions are not what many people would prefer, and so having additional capital come in, additional money, if you will, come into the area sounds good. And one thing that concerns me is, why is that money coming in? And I talked with an individual today, said there's a lot out there and a lot's going to be coming into San Rafael because it's, to use his words, maybe it was just trying to flatter me, I'm not sure, but San Rafael is a well-run city. It's a key location. And so for a variety of other reasons, he expects a lot of investment capital to come in. And if it comes in as opportunity zone, what is that all about? That represents funds that substantial investors have, if they have capital gains, that is taxable transactions that would result in significant tax, they can come in, invested in our opportunity zone, and the result of that is either a deferral or a substantial reduction of the tax associated with that, or perhaps a complete deferral. That sounds pretty good. That sounds like something Washington, quite frankly, would think is terrific for some of the investors. But what are the consequences? The consequences are what I'm concerned about, and that's what we've recently observed. David knows far better than I, but Renee of Ren Legal Aid. The consequence is the money comes in and we see a substantial investment made that John's made reference to, and he's absolutely right about it. But if an investment, the investor is going to say, okay, I'm entitled to a return on that, and what is the consequence of that? Increased rents. So the cloud that I see out there and intend to look at, and once I know a little bit more about it, intend to look at, because I think we're going to see this repeat. And this could be the tip of the iceberg, and it's a little bit of a heads up. And one of the reasons why I'm in favor of something like this at this point in time, it may seem belated. I might offer that we are actually ahead of this curve when it comes to opportunity zone, because that's the one that's really going to get us. And the two examples that we've seen, dollars to donuts, I'm betting, those are opportunity funds coming into our community, which sounds good, but it has consequences. And I think our community deserves to have us address this issue in a pretty thoughtful way, which we're attempting to do. And so with the help of many of you and perhaps others, we're going to get ahead of that curve. And wish us luck on that one. But again, it won't take us 3 years to resolve that. So we thank you, each and every one of you that spoke this evening, and others that came out in support of the action we're going to be taking in a relatively short period of time, thanks to the help of terrific staff that we have. And we'll let it rest at that point. Like I said, we'll form this committee, and if it's okay with the council, since we've already started on it to some degree, Andrew McCullough and I will address this to the extent of our abilities to bring back to this council for further modification and perhaps adoption. I anticipate that there will be adoption, but we need to get ourselves into a better place than we are right now to do so. So unless there are other comments, I would ask for a motion to accept the report that we have before us.
I move that we accept the report before us.
And second.
Moved and second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Bushy.
Aye.
Councilmember Collin. Councilmember Gamblin. Vice Mayor McCullough.
Aye.
Mayor Phillips.
Aye, matter carries 5-0. Thanks, everybody. We'll now move on to council members' reports. No? Zip, zip. Council member? No. There is no successor, and therefore I want to adjourn the meeting in the honor of and recognition and appreciation of Mary O'Brien.